Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes 4 study session items. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. The study session will be televised on Channel 8 and through live video streaming on Broomfield's website, broomfield.org/live. And for our hearing impaired residents present, we have wireless headsets available through the AV team in the back of the council chambers. So our first agenda item this evening is the 2022 audit and review of the annual comprehensive financial report by Broomfield's independent auditor, Reuben Brown, LLP. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, community and council. Brenda Ritchie, our CFO, will introduce us, and Reuben Brown is approaching the podium. Ms. Ritchie.
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Brenda Ritchie, CFO. Every year, Broomfield prepares financial statements in accordance to our governmental accounting principles and standards, and we're required to have an independent auditor, which is appointed by the council, selected, I should say, by the council to ensure that we're maintaining our compliance with those standards. As with previous years, this year again, we have council has selected Reuben Brown to conduct those audits for 2022 financials. And we have with us here this evening, Mr. Matt Marino and Ms. Stephanie Simon as well from the firm to provide their overview and analysis resulting in those recommendations and findings. Council will note that there were some findings and recommendations that staff completely acknowledges, and will continue to work towards a resolution to mitigate those findings and recommendations and incorporate that. Our goal is to continuously improve so that we can have a clean audit opinion and maintain our strong financial holding. We wouldn't have that without our accounting team continuing to put in their all. So I do want to give a recognition for that, even though we've been short-staffed, and that's been one of the findings that led to the finding was the turnover that we've had from those tenured employees that have left. And so trying to get that on board, but our team has been stellar to jump in, and you'll hear from Reuben Brown this evening about that. So again, I just wanted to quickly give the opportunity to for council to ask questions afterwards, for Reuben Brown to present their findings with respect to Broomfield's financial operations and our standings. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Marino. Thank you.
Thank you. As Brenda said, I'm Matt Marino. I've been your engagement partner the last several years. So I'm going to go through the audit results. They told me I couldn't present all night, so I can't talk about all 200 pages, but I will hit the highlights that I think you need to know as a council member so that you can do your governance duties. We're going to do a couple different things. If you want to flip to the next slide, please. So here's our contact information. While we are your independent auditors, we're here to help. We can't make decisions for management, but we can help point them in the right directions and help connect them with other entities that might be dealing with similar sorts of issues. So if there's questions throughout the year, don't hesitate to reach out and ask us, because we're there to help. We'll maintain our independence throughout that process, but we're here. We're just a phone call away. So let us know. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go through a couple different things. We're going to do our required communications to you as governance. So because we're auditors and we're engaged by you as city council, there's certain things under our professional standards that we need to communicate to you. I'll also work through the annual comprehensive financial report. Why is it called an annual financial comprehensive report? Broomfield files with Government Finance Officers Association for the Certificate of Excellence. It's not required to do that, but Broomfield has done it for many, many years, and they will be submitting for 2022 as well. So that's that. And then we'll talk about a couple GASB pronouncements that will be impacting future years, as well as GASB pronouncements that we did implement for this year. And then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie Simon. Stephanie Simon has been your manager for the last several years, and she was a staff for many years before that. And we could talk about governmental accounting all night, but I'm sure you all don't want to hear quite that much detail. So go ahead, Steph, and I'll round it up from there.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to take a minute to go through the auditor communications letter. So of course we work with management throughout the audit process, but really our letter is to governance. And so the standards, as Matt mentioned, require us to communicate certain things with you. And so I'm going to go through those and then give you the opportunity to ask any questions. So your management team is responsible for selecting and implementing its appropriate accounting policies and procedures. Those are in footnote 1. We did have a new accounting standard that was implemented this year called GASB 87. That's over leases. Gross simplification is that you put all the leases on the balance sheet. And of course, there are a ton of nuances to that, but that is the effect of that standard. We didn't have any other accounting policy changes. We didn't find any material transactions that were entered into during a different period or anything that lacked authoritative guidance. And moving to page 2. So there are certain accounting estimates that are more sensitive than others. And that could be they may have a more significant impact on future periods. So we consider those are primarily your capital related items. So that could be the condition of your infrastructure, the estimate of your useful lives, which determines by how quickly and how much those assets are depreciated. Also now we have leases and the discount rate heavily impacts the net present value of those. And that's how those are recorded on the balance sheet. So very significant estimates there. Also the net pension liabilities and those related numbers, although those are primarily determined by actuarial valuations. There's also some disclosures that are more significant than others that may be more significant to the users of the financial statements. Those are primarily, in our opinion, the fair value of Broomfield's investments, the terms and amounts of debt and lease agreements, your employee retirement plans, including that net pension liability, developer agreements, as well as any funds where there are expenditures in excess of budgeted amounts. And then moving to page 4, nope, sorry, page 3. I'm missing, oh no, missing my page 3.
Oh,
Sorry. Okay, I think I remember what was on there. So we are required to report to you any corrected misstatements during the year. So those are items that we adjust during the financial statements. We're also required to report uncorrected misstatements. Those are things that are above trivial, but that don't necessarily rise to the level where it could cause a material misstatement. So those are not reflected in the financial statements, but we do have a list of them for you at the back, just as a required disclosure. Also moving on to page 4, we didn't have any disagreements with management. There are certain representations that we require, and those are in a letter that is attached. We are unaware of management consulting with any other accountants regarding audit matters. And then just kind of a catch-all here at the end of page 4, no other significant issues or findings to report to you all. Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, to dovetail off Stephanie, I'm going to go with the annual comprehensive financial report and kind of weave in some of the things she was talking about. We are presenting here in July a little bit because we had some delays in finishing the audit for a couple different reasons. The leasing standard was no small lift. So your finance and accounting team had their work cut out for them, but they worked through it and we got it done. And then we also had to finish up the federal funds audit because Broomfield receives and expends more than $750,000 of federal grant money. You kind of get an extra audit in addition to your normal financial statement audit. Well, yay for you all. I'll go through the results of that. I'm not going to go through the full annual comprehensive financial report, but I'm going to kind of highlight some areas for those of you who don't do this every day. So when you orient yourself through the document, it's attached in the agenda packet, but I want to make it useful so that you all know what you're looking at and kind of why things are there. So the first section I'd like to highlight in the ACFR, or the annual comprehensive financial report, I'll call it ACFR going forward, so I don't have to keep saying that, is in the management discussion and analysis. It's just like it sounds. It's management discussion and analysis of what happened for the year. It's a really good small snapshot of a 200+ page document of what did Broomfield accomplish this year? What were some of the reasons things happened the way they were? And so that's there. Just preceding that is our independent auditors report. And so you'll see that we did issue an unmodified or a clean opinion. I know that sounds very unexciting, but that's auditor speak for the audit. The financial statements have been adjusted and we feel they are not materially misstated. So that's that part of it. Following those two sections, you have your government-wide financial statements. So that's full accrual financial, where you have recorded all your assets, all of your liabilities, and including pension liabilities, lease liabilities, all that. And then right behind that is your fund financial statements, which is where most of you probably have spent most of your time talking about budget. We budget by fund, general fund, human services, all that sort of stuff. And so that's on a different basis accounting. It's called modified. It's kind of like cash. It's not exactly cash, but it does not have all of the long-term liabilities and the long-term fixed assets on it. And that's governmental accounting standards rules for that. Behind the financial statements are your footnotes. There's like 70 pages of footnotes plus. There's a lot of information in there about how do we value the assets? How are liabilities measured? What are some of the assumptions that are made in the pension calculations? What are some of the assumptions made with regard to leases? There's a ton of detail in there, and it's a lot of information to go through. But in case you really get into governmental accounting, you can read through it and you can really understand why we are where we are as far as financial reporting. Behind that is your statistical section. Your statistical section is just like it sounds, various stats about Broomfield, whether it be population, sales tax, property taxes, all that sort of stuff. We don't necessarily opine on that, but we do make sure that it jives with the information included in this document. And then the area that I'm sure you'll all want to talk about, and it's on page 199 of the ACFR. It's that nice little grid that has the check marks in it. And so there's a couple check marks there. We did issue a material weakness over financial reporting. We also did issue a material weakness over a couple controls over a couple different programs. We audited 5 programs this year, 5 federal programs this year. We audited the SNAP cluster, so supplemental nutrition. We audited the highway planning instruction program, the epidemiology lab capacity infectious disease program, the temporary assistance for needy families, and the Medicaid cluster. We have to rotate through the different programs that the Broomfield does every year based on risk. So in the future years, as Broomfield spends ARPA or your recovery funds, I can tell you that one's going to get selected. It's deemed high risk. You just haven't spent enough money for us to audit it. So we're planning on likely auditing that probably in 23 and maybe even 24, just depending on how the funds spend out. But I do want to let you know that we did issue those 2 findings. The internal control over financial reporting, Brenda did talk about a little bit. Your finance and accounting team has been in various stages of full staffed or partially staffed. They're kind of at the point where they now have their staff in, but they kind of started post the audit for 2022. So hopefully for 23, things will be a lot easier on the team to get this done where they want it and get it reported to you at the end of June so that we're not reporting to you in July. But there were just different financial close processes that did not occur when they needed to or were not fully done accurately that required us to make numerous audit adjustments. Material weakness sounds rather ominous, but really just means that we had to make adjustments that we felt were material to the financial statements, and we need to let you know that. The next 2 findings are both material weaknesses as well. The first one has to do with the preparation of the schedule of expenditure of federal awards. So that's your, just like it sounds, you have to produce a schedule that shows how did we spend our federal money and what programs spent money in different ways. That is an expenditures-based report, not a revenue-based report. And so we did have to make some adjustments to get that on an expenditures basis. This was a repeat finding from prior year. We did notice some progress in getting it corrected, but I know that Broomfield is working through getting a grants position hired, and hopefully that'll help supplement that. But we did have to make adjustments to get that on an expenditures basis again this year. And then the last finding we had related to controls over 2 of the programs, the Medicaid and the TANF. So you have your temporary assistance and your Medicaid. I want to be clear, you have to administer the program and you have to have controls that monitor that administration of the program. We did not find that people were giving benefits or participating in the program incorrectly, we found that there were not controls that were documented that were monitoring it. So we did not find that the program was run incorrectly. It's just the controls need to be documented that monitors that that was being done correctly. So I would say you kind of, for lack of a better term, lucked out, if that makes sense, that you didn't have findings, because a lot of times if you don't have a documented control, it could mean that there were benefits that were paid that shouldn't have been, and so on. So that's the main findings. I don't want to belabor too much in the detail because like I said, I could talk about this all night long, and I love talking about it, but I'm really here for you to engage in a dialogue and answer questions that you might have on the 200 plus pages of information we provided for you in the packet.
Thank you. Does that complete your presentation?
After question, that's the part, I'll wrap it up after questions, but I'll leave some time for questions right now.
Okay, well, then we will go to council member questions. If anyone has any questions. Councilmember Anderson.
Oh, thank you. I do have a few questions here. And the first question is regarding the table of uncorrected misstatements.
Correct.
If you could just like clarify, are they really not misstatements, or why did we leave uncorrected misstatements? It's like one page.
There's several different funds that the Broomfield has. And so either county management deemed them not to be material to that fund. So like, I think one or two of them relate to the general fund, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. And so, a small amount would not impact the financial condition of that fund. We make management aware of it, and they elected to not book them. And we didn't feel that they had to be booked in order to make sure that the financials were not materially misstated.
Okay, and that might be a question more for our staff. Then there was the $578,000 in the open space fund. Is now a good time for to have Brenda Ritchie
Yes.
address it? Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think there's some questions in the community about that $578,000 of the open space fund and why that didn't end up in the open space fund.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Anderson. If I can look into that and then come back up with a response to that.
Yeah, that'd be fine. And another night's fine too. There was
Thank
just want to make sure that money got to where it was supposed to be. And then another question is, so after all these changes are made where the misstatements are corrected, that would impact the like the final fund balances, I would assume. And is there like, do we know what the previous fund balance was? And this might be a question for Ms. Ritchie. Like, do we know what the previous fund balance was and then the corrected fund balance after the misstatements are corrected?
Yeah, so as part of the audit process, we do provide management with the adjusting journal entries, and included in that required communication is a attestation that management has recorded all the adjustments that we said needed to be recorded, and that the fund balances where they might have started pre-audit, they would have a tracking of where the final fund balances for all the different funds might lie, which there's various funds that are impacted. So.
Okay, and then we would see those. I don't know if you want to comment to Ms. Ritchie.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. So yes, we would, to just kind of simplify the statement, Ms. Marino, but staff will go in and then make those adjustments so that we have accurate fund balances, so that we will use that for the beginning fund balances of the next fiscal year.
Okay, so the next time we see the budget, we'll see those corrected.
That's correct. So, and that's a great opportunity to kind of help clarify. So the timing of the act for the annual comprehensive financial statement is going to differ from when the budget. So the budget beginning balance is based on a forecast and it's looking forward. Whereas the ACFR is a look back on our actual financials that occurred due to the timing of when we adopt the budget. It's based on projections of where we think our fund balances will be. As you can tell, so we're right now in July, so we're now wrapping up and we have the actuals for 2022. So our next budget amendment that we bring forward in the fall for our revised 23 budget will have those accurate actuals for the 22 ending fund balance, which becomes the 23 beginning fund balance. It's a bit of a timing, but I do want to clarify that our ACFR is going to differ in those numbers due to that timing issue. That helps.
Okay. No, that is helpful. Thank you. And then the only other question I have, I think, because I think some of my questions are more related to our next budget, as I'm trying to understand the ones that are related to the audit, is the, okay, so this, like, we're seeing significant turnover and some of the delays. Is that common in other government? Like, is it just kind of a sign that like the current times? Is that?
Yes,
Is that-
so I would say virtually every government I work with has one or more positions open in their finance or accounting team. Some of them are even in worse condition than Broomfield. A couple things contributed to that. A lot of people decided they didn't want to do finance and accounting anymore after the pandemic. Number two, there's a lot of grant funding out there. The federal government, as a result of the pandemic, created several different programs to address the pandemic, and that created a lot more money that needed to be monitored, accounted for, reported on, and so on. And there were only so many people that knew how to do that before. And when you add more into it, it kind of creates a supply and demand sort of thing. So I'd love to tell you that there's a ton of people out there doing it, but there's just not as many as anybody would like. We as a firm even have other entities reaching out to us saying, would you be your consultant or your auditor? And we have to say, you know, we have what we have for clients we're serving. We can't take on more and still do what we want to do for our clients. And so we're not even immune from that as well as an organization. So.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. And that's all my questions for now.
All right, thank you. Next is Councilmember Lim.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Marino referred to our process of hiring a grant position. Do we have an update on that, or is it hopeful?
It's a difficult position. Similar to what our colleague just explored. We've been out 3 different times for that grant position. Adding to the complexities of people not really wanting to be in finance anymore, adding to the complexities of grants, consulting and working from home and remote work. We all anticipate that there will be not a spike, if you will, but certainly a stabilization that we're seeing throughout the rest of finance, that we're seeing throughout the rest of HR, with these various positions where people are starting to settle. Grants is tough, and there's big dollars that are out there right now, and companies are paying big dollars for those folks that write grants. But writing and chasing the grant, to your point, is very different than administering that grant. So oftentimes it's not the same person that has that skill set. Grant management as a whole really is about 3 different buckets: the person that writes it, that researches it, the person that brings it in, that finds the match on the back end from a municipal perspective, and a completely different skill set from those that administer it. Are you doing it right? Are you doing it when you need to be doing it? And all of those kind of regulatory pieces. So it's not a one size fits all. So long answer long. We're hoping that this round generates some stabilization in that area.
Okay, thanks. Well, there was good news that I saw in that Broomfield's net position increased by $103 million this year, or at least from 21 to 22. And of note also, in some of the list of FTEs, often residents ask about the police staffing. In 2021 to 22, there was an increase in police staffing and FTEs. In the principal property taxpayers on page 172. Yeah. So I don't know if this is the first time I've noticed that this has happened, or if I just haven't noticed it before. Extraction oil and gas is the principal property taxpayer in Broomfield to a tune of $68 million. Is that new, or is that?
Ms. Ritchie.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Lim. That is not new. That is something that we've had ongoing. I could look back and see when that began, if that would be helpful.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. So when we think about, we have $68 million from extraction, and then we might want to keep that in mind when we think about approving an $1 million air quality monitoring contract later. Okay, I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'm timekeeper and council member. I can do this. I just have one simple question, I feel. I remember you came in during COVID times and I appreciate all your work, and you guys do a phenomenal job of really getting in the details and in the weeds. And I just remember you guys talking about how a lot of times the targets were changing on the ARPA funding and what those reports look like. And so it just kind of concerns me if we have all of these at-risk areas that we're looking at. I'm just wondering, I'm hoping that those targets don't change, or if they do change, what would that look like possibly?
So luckily with the federal funding, it's not like it was during the pandemic with the coronavirus relief or non-ARPA, where they were changing the rules midterm and there was an interim final rule and there was a final rule. And then at this point, the rules have been out for a while, and Broomfield has been working through a process to identify how you're going to spend the money, how that's going to occur. Hence why you haven't recognized it yet, because you're working through that process in an orderly and controlled fashion. And so we'll see when we audit it, but I would say your management team is well aware of the rules and is trying to work through that with you all as city council to identify the right ways to deploy that funding in compliance with the rules. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your sort of forethought on what could come up in the future and what we need to audit. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. So you had talked about the GASB 87, which covers leasing. So is that leasing, is that both tenant as well as landlord? So whereas the
Correct.
city and county of Broomfield is a tenant, but they're also a landlord in other areas, that covers both of those.
It does. So if, for those of you that took business school back in the day, you might have heard capital leases and operating leases, that all goes away. So that's on where you're leasing something, but also where you're collecting rents, you have a receivable and a deferred inflow on the books to the extent that you have money you expect to collect. And that leasing standard did cover that sort of transaction as well, both on the lessor and lessee side.
Okay, so we're going to see that both in the accounts payable as well as accounts receivable.
You'll see a liability when you
Okay.
when you owe rent, and you'll see a right to use asset that offsets that liability for the whatever you might be renting from somebody. But then if you're collecting the rent, you're going to have a receivable and a deferred inflow for the rent that you're going to be collecting in the future.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yes.
So two findings. So one of them was related to staff turnover, retirements that we've seen in the finance, which I'll ask Ms. Ritchie in just a moment, but wanted to talk about the others. So that has to do with mainly grants, right? And when we're looking at those, is that unsimilar? Well, I guess, is that different than we've seen in the past, or is this a continuation of this, or is it slightly different than what the material findings that we've seen in the past?
The schedule of expenditures of federal awards finding is a repeat finding from last year. The finding over the other program was it's not a repeat finding, but you have in many years past had various levels of control deficiencies or material weaknesses over other programs. It happens for various reasons. Either sometimes the control is not documented, but it did occur. In an auditor land, if it's not documented, it didn't occur. And so sometimes it's just a matter of documenting what occurred.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so, I think that it sounds like that in 2023, according to the staff response, we're looking to shore up those documentation of those controls, and as well as clean up those programs so that those aren't a continuation this next year. Is that accurate? Correct.
And provided that we're contracted to do your audit, we'll follow up on that, or whoever does your audit will do it as well. So.
Great, thank you. And then Ms. Ritchie, I have two questions for you. So looking at the staffing in terms of staff turnover and retirements, at this point, it sounds like that we're still down a few positions. So in 2023, or I guess in the budget for 2024, are we looking to, shore up those vacant positions at this point? But do we anticipate that we're going to be hiring additional positions as well to address some of these deficiencies that we have?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Schaff, and the opportunity to clarify. So we believe that the current staffing levels are sufficient in order to meet the needs and requirements in terms of if we can get them staffed. So as you've heard, it's been a little bit of a difficult market and competitive, especially in the grants area. We've had several candidates that we've made offers to, and then they've got 6 competing offers. So it's very difficult. We believe that number of staffing, the only thing that will come forward, it will align with our new financial ERP system request. And so that it would be an FTE position that finance will be seeking in 2024. But outside of that, we've met with our teams and determined workload, and we'll continue to evaluate that whether or not, but we believe the current staffing levels are sufficient. It's just a matter of getting the right folks in
Okay,
the seats.
great. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
that. Appreciate it. That's all I have, Mayor.
Well, thank you. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple questions for you and then one question for staff. You mentioned trivial material. Is that a dollar amount difference or what's the?
It's both quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative being a dollar amount and qualitative being like, hey, this is kind of a big deal to people. So it is both.
Do you have a specific dollar amount that would?
It's different for each opinion unit. So included in your financial statements are several opinion units. So you have your major funds, your general, your human services, or their own opinion units, and then all of your other funds that aren't big are kind of in a other aggregate remaining fund information bucket of like the lesser funds, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And that's the way the accounting standards set up. It honestly is kind of confusing to people who don't do it all the time, but that's the way that they set up the rules on it.
Okay,
So-
thank you. And then just so I'm reading the misstatements documents correctly, is the debit the fund it shouldn't be in and the credit the one it should be in? Is that how I'm reading it?
The debit and the credit is putting it in whichever account it should go in. The fund would either be, if you're on the uncorrected misstatements, it has a denotion of like, is it the general fund? Is it? But also your fund number on the actual posted journal entries would tell you which, like whether it was the general fund or another fund,
Gotcha.
which one it impacted based on the fund number.
Okay, so these are basically, it's not like money's missing. They're in the incorrect fund.
It's not necessarily even in the incorrect fund. Sometimes it was recorded in the wrong period. So like if a cash receipt came in January of 23, but it really belonged to December of 22, it's not like it was, it's getting it in the correct accounting period, accruing it to the correct accounting period if the services were rendered, even though you didn't get the invoice till later. It's that sort of stuff. It's reconciling it to whatever sort of record that tells us this is what the amount should be, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you. And then just one question for Ms. Ritchie. On the staffing question, what is the difficult, I mean, I understand that the competition is tough for these positions. And maybe this is a budget question for later, but are we anticipating higher costs related to filling those positions if we want to be more competitive?
It is something that we have discussed and looked at in those items, but we also want to make sure that we're aligning with our compensation philosophy and that we're not veering from what we've already established. So we'll continue to maintain what that market is that's been evaluated and determined by our partners within the Human Resources Department. So I think it's a matter of a conversation of looking at, do we need to make adjustments? And we'll continue to have those conversations, but we want to make sure that we're making it equitable and not creating an unnecessary compression for a limited market adjustment versus because maybe the market's hot right now, for example, for grant administrators is a key example, but maybe in 6 months that will slow down quite a bit. So maybe not given all the federal funding that's out there right now, but we want to be able to make sure that we are not creating an unintended consequence by chasing after a number. So we want to be thoughtful in our approach.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any other council questions? Well, I appreciate this. And I just, one quick question. Do you guys represent a lot of other local governments?
It's primarily what I do.
Oh.
I probably spend 80% plus of my time working with various types of local governments, whether it be a city, a county, school district, special district. Sometimes we do it as the auditor, sometimes we do it as a consultant, just helping them, and we don't have to be independent. We're there to help management because they might have staffing issues. But yes, that's primarily what both Stephanie and I do. So
Are you seeing a trend in some of the same issues of the grant management? Is that a tough one for everybody?
the large amount of federal funding, I mean, there were entities that had never needed a federal funds audit that now need federal funds audits because they got either coronavirus or ARPA, and now they need that. And so it's just a lot of money. If you look at your CFA or your schedule of expenditures or federal awards, pre-pandemic to now, it's quite a bit bigger because of the amount of money that is flowing through. And I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's just the factual of what occurred.
Right. Well, thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
And thank you all so much for the update. Ms. Ritchie, did you want to add anything?
Sorry, thank you for the opportunity to clarify a question, Mayor. Councilmember Lim, I just wanted to make sure on the property tax question regarding extraction, so that it is the assessed valuation. It's not that we're receiving that much property tax in from extraction. Yes. So I wanted to make sure that in case that was not clear, I realized. So thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, they're the principal property taxpayer ranked number 1. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else from,
There's one more item from us, and it's more of a prospective thing. So we talked a little bit about the LISA standard. So for 2023, governments will get to do more accounting standards implementation. So it's a GASB 96, so it's subscription-based information technology arrangements. So if you think about how you buy technology now compared to how you bought it 20 years ago. When we bought technology 20 years ago, buy a floppy disk, you installed it, you owned it till it quit working. It doesn't really work that way anymore. You usually are entering in an arrangement with some sort of company to use their technology. And so what happened is the Accounting Standards Board said, we need to account for that better because the way it's happening now is not the way it is actually has occurred in the past. So GASB 96 basically says, if you have entered into some of these arrangements with, it could be Microsoft, it could be some sort of other software vendor, you're going to, much like leases, have a asset you're going to show on the books for the asset you are purchasing, but you also have a liability for what you owe to utilize that asset in the future. And it's, so that's, probably we'll see a lot more volume. I've heard estimates of 3 to 6 times the amount of leases you had for the subscription based. If you think about like all the different softwares you use at home, I get you won't have to do GASB 96, but even here, there's, your assessor uses software, finance uses software. We use a software to do board meetings, and those may or may not qualify for this treatment under the accounting standards. So while your finance team has been hard at work keeping up, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board has been busy issuing clarifying standards or new standards to make sure that we're updating our financial picture for the users' financials going forward.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Councilmember Shaft.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. So the subscriptions that I guess the software that was purchased in the past, was that accounted for as an asset in the past, and is that still going to continue forward? Or?
It would depend on how that individual agreement was, but in many cases, like people did purchase software and they said it had a X number of useful life. But in the way things are typically handled now with software is you might lease it on a multi-year agreement, or not lease, but you might have an agreement where you're going to utilize that software for many years, and the financial specifics of the transaction change, where you're not just purchasing it, you're kind of financing it, and you might even store some of your data on their cloud, and that is if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other council member questions? Councilmember Ward, anything on your end? I see your remote. Good. All right. Well, then I guess that does it for us tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having us. And like I said, if there's things we need to help with as far as providing resources or advice, please don't hesitate to reach out on both mine and Stephanie's information's in the packet.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Our next item is a holistic housing update provided by Broomfield's Housing Division and Human Services Departments. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. And Sharon Tessier, our housing manager, had some family issues. She's been working remote. She was trying her best to be here on time so that she could give this presentation. Unfortunately, like many of us in the room, flight delays got the better of her. So we have our pinch hitters. Director Casey is going to review the first couple of topics. And Deputy Director Rachel King will do Sharon Tessier's part. With that, Mr. Casey.
All right, thank you, Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. I'm Dan Casey. I'm the Director of Human Services. I will be one of your hosts for this part of the events this evening. I'll have Rachel King with me as well. She'll do the housing portion. But I wanted to go over quickly some things that we do in the city and county of Broomfield, and then also specifically programs we run in human services. So tonight we will talk about our CHART team, our SWAP program, and I'll get into those acronyms when I get to the presentation, self-sufficiency programs, and then we'll do a housing division introduction, some of their accomplishments, talk about the 23 needs assessment, and then some program opportunities. And that will conclude our presentation, and you guys will have opportunities to ask questions. So go ahead and next slide, please. So Campsite Housing and Assessment Response Team, we refer to it as CHART. That is a multidisciplinary team made up of many departments within the city and county of Broomfield, including the police department, code enforcement, parks, rec, and senior services, open space and trails, public health and environment, human services, public works, community development, city and county attorney's office. I would love to take full credit for this team, but it is definitely not a human services program. It's a city and county of Broomfield program. And the purpose is to apply the guidelines and enforcement of the city and county of Broomfield's municipal code. And the reason we do that is because that code bans camping in Broomfield open space and parks overnight. I think some of you were on council when we established the CHART protocol back in 2021. And next slide, please. What we established back then was a 4-stage process that we still utilize today. The first part of our 4-stage process is the initial contact. So once we have made that contact with an individual or a group of individuals that are sleeping in open space or parks, we provide some resources to them. We give them a 1-page document. We refer them to the Refuge or FISH, some of our local nonprofits. And then that information is brought back to the CHART team. So we do a CHART review and we meet weekly for, it used to be about an hour or so, and now it's about 20 minutes because we've kind of gotten the system down. But we meet every week on Wednesday afternoons to staff any reports that we have in or any open cases that we're still working on. Then we provide a follow-up response. So after that meeting occurs, we'll determine if we need to post a notice for that camp to be cleaned up within 48 hours or 7 days. And then we post that notice the following day. So typically our postings go up on Thursdays. By the next Wednesday, we'll look back on that campsite. If it's been moved, that kind of concludes our work. If it has not, then we move into the next phase, and that would be our cleanup phase. You can see on the pictures here, our 4-step process is highlighted there. Our 7-day notice, there's an example. And then when I say post it, we actually physically post it on a stick with a sheet of paper next to the campsite. So it's actual physical posting on the location. Next slide, please. So since CHART started, and this is kind of the fun stuff, right? We get into the data and the numbers, and I think this is kind of eye-opening. So since we started in September of 21, there's been 110 reports received. And when I say reports received, we don't go out and actively try to find homeless encampments. We don't have a park rangers program. We don't have any staff that are out there looking for encampments. It's all based off of reports that are made to us. Sometimes we do get those reports from our park staff or our open space staff. if they run across something. An example would be a park staff saw a tent set up in center field at one of our ball fields. They would absolutely report that, and then we would address that. But of those 110 reports, 20 of those were on private property. We can't do a whole lot with those reports that are on private property other than collaborate with whoever that property belongs to. So 8 of those were on CDOT property, 5 were on RTD property, 2 of them were on the BNSF Railway property. 3 of the reports we received were not in Broomfield. And that's the other thing that that initial contact, our code enforcement team and our public health teams do the initial contact. And code enforcement finds the location and then they map it to make sure that it is within the city and county of Broomfield. And oftentimes folks report, well, in this case, 3 times people have reported campsites that actually were not in Broomfield. They might've been in Westminster or Boulder. And then 2 other, the others are actual truly private property. We had a business that had a report to us that was on their private property. And actually, I think both of those others were private businesses. Between October 1st of 22 and July 1st of this year, we received 61 reports. And that's the reason I started October 1 is that was the beginning of our cold weather season. So it's kind of interesting. And actually about 60% of our reports in total have come since October 1st. In that time frame, we've had 49 tents or tarps reported. 8 of those reached the cleanup stage, so that 4th stage in our 4-stage process. 7 of those 8 were abandoned, so that makes it relatively easy to clean up when there's not somebody actively staying there. 1 of them actually had someone living there. We have to make contact with that person. It gets a little, could be a little dicey, and I'll explain that a little bit later, but what then we do, and it's someone occupies that property, or if we think someone is occupying it, but they're not physically present, we move that property to a storage unit. And then we connect with one of our local nonprofits to meet that individual and go to that storage unit to get their property back. All of the rest of those 41 reports resulted in voluntary compliance. So I think that's outstanding. And that's a testament to our code enforcement team. And Brandon Murray is here tonight as my backup in case any tough questions come in. And also our police department. We do an amazing job of working with those individuals when we find them. And then again, 10 reports of cars or RVs. And again, cars and RVs are not parking in our parks or our open space. So those are handled through a different process, and that's handled through code enforcement. And then we had 2 reports of just some miscellaneous trash. There was a location by the at-home store. There was some trash that someone thought might have been a vacant encampment, and it was just trash. And the other one was a large number of the little 1-gallon propane bottles left in the park. So those 2 got cleaned up. Next slide, please. Really important, of all of those reports that we received, 110 of them with all of those voluntary compliances, we've had 0 summons been issued through our chart process. So that's people in tents or encampments or under one of our park gazebos. And I think that's important because it gets really, again, there's a lot of things that correlate with having someone move a location, right? We have a municipal code that says that they can't be in the park. So they've got to pick up all of their belongings and move somewhere else. And I know now that we're about 1.5 years into this work, it seems like we're getting a lot of the same repeat offenders that are what I would refer to as service resistant. We've talked to them, we've referred them to nonprofits, we've given them opportunities, we've brought them into our building, and just really haven't made any headway, and they're preferring not to participate in any of the programs. We've cleaned up 11 campsites, and that total to date, this is from the beginning of the chart inception, not since October, but since September of 21, is about $12,000. One campsite, and actually the bottom picture on that left-hand corner there, one campsite kind of skews those numbers because that one was about a $2,000 cleanup. We believe there's probably 5 to 10 people living at that campsite. There was multiple bicycle parts, coolers, tents, sleeping bags, trash, all kinds of things that were at that site. So that one was a kind of an outlier. That cost quite a bit of money to clean that one up. And I also have Brian Hamp from Public Health, and he's my other brain, my phone a friend in case stuff comes up about that. But they are also on the chart team. So it's interesting to have different perspectives, and we all have a different approach. And again, just quickly on the pictures, I won't go into this too much, but we do have some folks that are pretty bold, put a tent right in the middle of a picnic area in a park. And then we have others that hide, try to be more less noticeable, I should say, go behind trees. The one on the top, on the right-hand side, that was actually in right outside my building across the street by the ball fields. And that gentleman was there for about 8 or 10 days and finally voluntarily moved on. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving out of the chart process into the severe weather activation program. So SWAP is, again, what we refer to it is our program that really helps us with, sorry, I'm losing my pages here, with our homeless and unhoused in severe cold weather months. So that's an extreme cold weather hotel program. Unsheltered homelessness is what we target here, and that's defined by primary nighttime residents. That's a public or private place not designated for ordinary use as a regular sleeping accommodation. Again, you can think of the pictures we have here. One is a tent or actually both are tents, pretty severe weather. It would be very difficult for any of us to probably feel comfortable at minimum or survive at the worst case in a tent in those kind of conditions. So anybody in a car, a park, abandoned building, bus, train station, campground, we try to have that SWAP program so that those folks can get shelter. And then severe weather for our program is defined as weather from 32 degrees and colder with precipitation, so rain or snow. Obviously, if it's that cold, it's probably snowing. And then 20 degrees with no precipitation. So if it's going to be 20 degrees or lower for that evening, we would count that as severe weather. Next slide, please. For the 22-23 cold weather season, we contracted with a nonprofit called Almost Home. So Almost Home actually administers the SWAP program for us. They do an amazing job. They've got an outreach specialist that works specifically in Broomfield now. They've also got, I believe they call them resident assistants. So it's similar to like a college dorm. When we activate SWAP, there is someone with lived experience that is an employee of Almost Home at that location, at that hotel location, to help navigate, answer questions, find resources, just communicate with the folks, teach them the rules, and they're on site. So in 22-23 cold weather season, and I just updated this a few days ago, we had 132 residents that were served by SWAP. We issued 641 vouchers, and that equated to about 2,600 nights of shelter. As you know, we brought the contract before this board a couple weeks ago, and our SWAP contract for October 22 through the end of 23 is about $245,000. We will be including $200,000 in our 24 budget in human services to cover the expenses for SWAP in the next calendar year. A couple things why we would go down instead of up is we are not covering the number of months. There's extra months in the first contract. And also we had kind of an unprecedentedly cold weather, cold winter season. So there were several more nights that were included in the SWAP program. And also, as any program, as you start it up, you run into some hiccups at the beginning. We feel like we've ironed out a lot of those problems that we had initially, and that will help us be a little more efficient and effective going into the next cold weather season. And we're meeting routinely with Almost Home, Fish, Refuge, and a couple of our other nonprofits to make sure that we're all on the same page before the snow starts flying. And then I did put on here that the SWAP program from 25 and beyond will need to be evaluated for funding. It'll be interesting to see if we can move back to a non-congregate sheltering product for some of our unhoused. But the way that it's going, the hotel vouchers seem to be a very effective, efficient way to house folks. And then it also could, hopefully, if we play our cards correctly, it could turn in or transition to a temporary transition program so that we can have folks get into stable, permanent housing. Next slide, please. All right, so here's what we do. Here's the reason I'm here is our self-sufficiency team. And as I have on the other slides, Karen Anastas, our manager from our self-sufficiency team, is here. She is the big boss that makes sure that all those programs are running effectively. But I highlighted 3 programs for tonight's purposes. One is our self-sufficiency program. It's a self-sufficiency rental and mortgage assistance. And in human services, we love our acronyms. So SSRMA, there will be a test on these later. That's our own program that we have established in Broomfield. That particular program is through $75,000 of general fund that is set aside for emergency rental and mortgage assistance. We do have eligibility requirements. We also require that they establish some sustainability plans. And then this isn't money in perpetuity for any individual. It's an up to amount. So it's about $3,500 per individual that we would go up to, and not everybody would qualify for that full amount. $75,000, just so kind of to put it into context, in 23 so far, so in 23, we have already spent about $28,000 as of July 1. That leaves us about $47,000 left for the balance of the year. We will probably spend all of that money in the course of this calendar year. The second program that's highlighted there is our tenant-based rental assistance program, and that's funded through the home grant. And actually the dollars for that program go to Rachel's team, and we administer the program. We have a staff member that administers the program from the Human Services Department. And in this program year, so I think I've been before this board before talking about fiscal years and calendar years and all of the things that are confusing. A program year for this particular program would be a calendar year. So we have about $200,000 in that program year to spend on TBRA, and that fluctuates. So every year it can kind of go up and down depending on how much money we have, how much money we're getting. And we typically have folks on the TBRA program in a 2-year program. So that's not a one and done like our SSRMA. It's a consistent program that lasts for about 24 months. Next slide, please. And this is, I believe, my last slide. So Community Services Block Grant, again, CSBG, not to be confused with CDBG. That's a different grant. Our Community Services Block Grant is allocated to us through the State Department of Local Affairs. We will issue this funding to eligible families in the area. We have what's called a tripartite board, and Councilmember Henkel serves on that board, and they help decide how those dollars will be spent. Again, CSBG, when I put this together, $36,000, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but there's, again, some fluctuation because CSBG is not a fiscal year or calendar year. It's an ongoing program for multiple years, but we typically do about $36,000 in a calendar year, a program year. What we used these dollars for in 22 and 23 were our seniors. We've got a lot of seniors in this community that are experiencing tremendous rent increases. So our team put together a program, and we went to bat for our seniors in this community and tried to help them. Again, that's another up to $3,500. It's a one-time amount, so it's great for folks that are trying to get back on their feet or trying to establish themselves, but sometimes in perpetuity, these programs aren't overly helpful. And again, there's other options, and we can, I don't want to say cycle people through, but they would have another opportunity downstream to be eligible for these funds again. But once you're on like a CSBG program or a TBRA program or even our SSRMA, it's not in perpetuity like a program like Medicaid or SNAP, where it's a re-eligibility and you can keep rolling and stay on it for a long period of time. These programs would not be like that. And that concludes my portion, and I will hand the podium over to Rachel.
Thank you. Good evening, Council, Mayor Pro Tem, Council members. As Manager Hoffman mentioned, I am pinch hitting tonight for our Housing Programs Manager, Sharon Tessier. So I apologize. Unfortunately, you won't get the full Tessier experience, but I promise that I will try to do as best as I can to represent her work here. So first off, what is the Housing Division and what does it do? As you may have heard Sharon say previously, the Housing Division approaches its work as a person-centered, inclusive department that meets individuals where they're at. We strive to be proactive and address priorities of housing security and preservation, as well as upstream mobility for residents within the housing spectrum. You'll see in a future slide that we do this work by focusing on residents at 60 to 120% of the area median income. And it is important to note that providing those services and opportunities for income aligned housing is complex, expensive, and ever changing. So we are constantly navigating those changes in order to find opportunities for new programs and initiatives. To do that, we're regularly connecting with other city departments, community partners, regional initiatives to address housing issues across the state. And as a final note on this slide, you'll note a new housing division logo in order to continue expanding our community presence and outreach. The communications team was kind enough to create a new housing division logo to help with these efforts, really primarily to help residents identify housing staff at events and to connect with resources easier. So next slide, please. This graphic further illustrates our city and community partnerships and the impact of housing across many community needs. Next slide. To briefly review our 2023 accomplishments so far, we are excited to show progress in several programs, some of which were just introduced this year. Focusing on the priority of housing, security, and preservation, our 2023 funded programs have served just shy of 300 households year to date. And that's actually an updated number from today. We have about 298 households. So 12 households in the homeowner rehab program, which is administered through Brothers Redevelopment Incorporated, 104 households approved in the partial property tax refund program administered through our staff, and 82 households in our COVID rental assistance program administered through Brimfield Fish. The team this year has also given new focus to creating and expanding relationships, building new initiatives with community partners and other CCOB departments. Next slide, please. Also in 2023, the Boulder Brimfield Home Consortium worked tirelessly to apply for over $4.2 million in home ARP funding from HUD under the American Rescue Allocation Plan. Brimfield is now expected to receive $1.4 million to assign to the Brimfield Housing Alliance for their Cottonwood project, should that project be approved. And then the remaining funds will host 2 additional projects within the consortium. I will just note that this was an incredible win for the consortium and for Brimfield in particular. This is the first time that Brimfield is receiving a share of home funds from the consortium for a development project specifically. So many congratulations to Sharon Tessier and the consortium team for their hard work and dedication to that effort. Next slide, please. Focusing next on our inclusionary housing ordinance, with the 2022 update, we are now seeing an anticipated trend of less cash in lieu revenue. So year to date, we've collected a little bit over $800,000 and expect roughly $2 million total by year end. We are seeing more hybrid proposals as well from developers offering a mix of affordability and cash in lieu in order to satisfy the ordinance requirements. And currently our cash in lieu revenue funds 2 programs, our partial property tax refund program, and then tenant landlord counseling through Colorado Legal Services. Next slide, please. Also in our inclusionary housing program, we're getting ready to welcome or have welcomed about 292 income aligned homes, both for sale and rental. So our for sale properties include Lenars Palisade Park. So all of those units were sold. We have Grandview from Century Homes and Dillon Point from Wonderland Homes. So we have those townhome products coming online, we expect in 2024. Next slide, please. For rental units under the IHO, we have 2 properties recently entitled. Wadsworth Junction, that's one of those hybrid projects that we talked about, where they are providing some units on site, but also are making a cash in lieu payment. We have Harvest Hill providing all of their units at an 80% AMI level. And then Bridges at Flatiron is actually already occupied and leased up to residents as well. So that is the current state of our inclusionary housing program.
Ms. King, can you define entitled for council, please?
Yes, thank you, Manager Hoffman. So we're referring to these projects as having an SDP or site development plan being approved by council at this stage. Thank you. And next slide, please. And this is, again, just a map representing various approved, completed, or proposed projects under the inclusionary housing program. Next slide, please. So as we approach our work moving forward, we commissioned an updated housing needs assessment in 2023 in partnership with the Broomfield Housing Alliance to help inform our work. However, we did want to pause tonight and reflect on the recommendations provided by the previous needs assessment conducted in 2018. And then progress can be seen here under several recommendations, but in particular, through the efforts of the updated inclusionary housing ordinance, the introduction of new programming, and of course, the creation of the Broomfield Housing Alliance. As Ms. Tessier indicated in an April study session earlier this year, we utilized our close partners at Root Policy Research in Denver to provide our updated 2023 needs assessment. The final report will be released shortly. However, in the next 3 slides, we'll have a little preview of the updated findings. And those findings are organized into 3 areas. So first, socioeconomic framework, second, housing profile, and third, housing needs affordability. So we'll start with socioeconomic framework. If you could go to the next slide, please. Root Policy reviewed data such as household composition, population, ethnicity, et cetera. And 2 key takeaways, although not surprising, are that Broomfield grew significantly in population from 2010 to 2020, and that while household income grew significantly as well in Broomfield, neither of these growths kept pace with the housing market. Additionally, we do see a decrease in the composition of families with children and an increase in senior residents. And we are anticipating for these trends to continue over the next decade as well. Finally, while poverty rates in Broomfield declined, single parents, Hispanic households, and persons with disabilities continue to have notably higher poverty rates. Next slide, please. Next, the housing profile examines characteristics of renters and owners, housing supply and availability, development trends, affordable housing stock, and ownership and rental market trends. So Root Policy primarily found that Broomfield has increased our income-aligned housing stock, which is good news. The bad news is that our share isn't keeping pace again with housing growth and demands. Primarily, Broomfield is bringing in new multifamily rental units, and depending on the year, we're seeing as much as 90% of the housing development being that multifamily rental product. And in 2021 to 2022, we have about 18% of homes sold being townhomes or that mixed density unit product. Next slide, please. And then finally, getting down to housing needs and affordability. So a couple items to note, just a note on the cost burden households. We have roughly 45% of our renters and 17% of our homeowners being cost burdened. But then if we look at the housing needs gap, we now have a housing needs gap on rental units for about 1,600 units. Across households earning $100,000 annually or less. However, the report also noted that there's a significant gap of units for households above $100,000 annually, and that's actually greater at 2,200. But this really suggests that there might just be not enough home ownership units available at prices attainable to those households that are naturally available on the market. Next slide, please. This is just a graphical representation of those renter incomes, and then the gap, you see the cumulative rental gap keeping track on the right side there. So when we have about 1,600 units, but then if you go all the way down to the bottom under $100,000 or more, we are actually seeing 2,200 unit gap there. When you take the net of those two, it still gets us to the net gap of the 1,600. But we do want to distinguish between those two market gaps. Next slide, please. And this is just a graphical representation of folks who are cost burdened or severely cost burdened for renters and owners. Next slide, please. And then finally, in 2023, as you're aware, Broomfield conducted its biennial community survey. Several questions addressed the community's rating of affordable quality housing and housing access and options. There's a couple of statistics here, and of course, you're familiar with the report. But overall access to affordable housing scored fairly low among respondents. Next slide, please. So moving forward, as we work to address these identified housing needs, it's important to reflect on the spectrum of housing opportunities and keep in mind where our key partners are focusing. This graphic illustrates the specific AMIs and services addressed by Broomfield Human Services, Broomfield Housing Alliance, and the Broomfield Housing Division. For the Broomfield Housing Division specifically, our focus again is on providing services and income-aligned units through that inclusionary housing program for residents at 60 to 120% AMI. Next slide, please. And moving forward for the housing division, our staff sees several opportunities to expand service provisions to the community that continue to support priorities of providing housing security for residents, but also introducing options for housing mobility and growth. So first, to continue addressing housing security, we propose continuing the partial property tax refund program in 2024 with the current eligibility criteria and funding as originally approved by council. We will note if the program continues past 2024 with the anticipated increased levels of participation for next year, we expect to need additional funding annually to fund that program at the new levels that we expect to see next year. The program is funded with those cash in lieu payments, or as we call it, the Housing Development Fund. So that's where that $1 million for 2023 and 2024 comes from. And then again, we expect that $1 million annually from that fund to be needed for those expected levels. But after 2024, staff will conduct a program analysis when the program closes to determine demand and future options for that program. Second, staff proposes to expand slightly the home rehab program, really just focusing on that eligibility. So right now, the current program has two different tiers, depending on the type of rehab that the homeowner qualifies for. They're separated out at 50% AMI and 80% AMI. So our proposed expansion would simply increase the qualifying AMI for all of those to 80%. We have also partnered with Brothers Redevelopment this year for their community volunteer paint-a-thon program. So the economic vitality team, as well as the city attorney's office, participated in a volunteer event just a couple of weeks ago, and we expect to help Brothers Redevelopment expand that community outreach for the program next summer to make it more visible and accessible to more residents. But we do not propose to increase any funding in that program either, and that's funded with the Community Development Block Grant. Next slide, please. Still under housing stability, we are proposing an option to introduce some sort of support for senior renters, acknowledging that we have some supports in place for senior homeowners. We also understand the need in the community to support folks who are renting. So staff continues to evaluate several options, including senior home share programs, rental assistance, or other temporary supports. And we're engaged in a few regional discussions as well to address this issue, including with senior services and the Senior Resource Board. We expect to have more information on that in the coming months. And then finally, to introduce a program under housing mobility and growth, staff proposes implementing a down payment assistance program for middle income earners. AMIs would align with the inclusionary housing program at 90 to 100% AMI and would allow up to $25,000 in assistance through a deferred repayable loan. While the program is costly, it will require $1 million annually, we expect from the Housing Development Fund. Slide. And that concludes our presentation this evening, so we are happy to take your questions.
Ms. King, would you be kind enough to introduce Vivian Bott right behind you? I know that she would be standing up there with Sharon, and we sure look forward to your upcoming presentations, Viv.
Absolutely. With pleasure. Our staff member, Vivian Del Pizzo, is our housing program specialist. She's single-handedly responsible for the vision of what the partial property tax refund program looks like today. She had a lot of help from our intern who coincidentally has now found a position with Broomfield Housing Alliance, which we couldn't be more thrilled about that setup. But Vivi has been an incredible asset to the team, and she continues to provide a lot of guidance and support for that program, as well as a lot of our HUD funded programs as well.
Well, thank you. We'll move on to council member questions. Starting with Councilmember Delgadillo and then Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I have a handful of questions. So the first is about unhoused individuals' possessions. How long are those possessions stored?
Thank you, Councilmember Delgadillo, for the question. We have a policy that it's no less than 60 days. So we will store them for at least 60 days to give those individuals an opportunity to retrieve those items. To be honest with you, the few times we've had property in our storage, it's been there more like 6 months.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then this one's kind of a tricky question. Is there any path from a person setting up an encampment to a criminal offense? And my reason for asking that is that in America, obviously, we've gotten rid of debtor's prison. However, there are effectively many structures we have that are essentially criminalizing property. So I want to make sure that there are safeguards in place.
Yeah, my initial reaction to that is absolutely not in Broomfield, but I can't say absolutely not, right? If there were an assault or if there was some kind of other event that precipitated an arrest, but we do not apprehend. Commander Guylis was going to be here tonight, but he couldn't make it. I can't speak to the policy of the police department specifically for that, but we do everything in our power as far as the CHART team and human services and PD to not criminalize homelessness. We do not need to add another layer of burden upon those folks. So at all costs, we try to avoid it. When I say that it would never happen, again, that's up to the incident or the situation, but yes, we try our darndest not to criminalize that.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Obviously, there are, edge cases and stuff if something, violent incident were to occur or something like that. So
Councilmember Delgadillo,
Yes.
I'm just going to add one thing, and that is one of the statistics that chart tracks. It's myth versus fact, right? And so until we started doing this work, it was becoming a magnet. It was going to be phenomenally expensive. It was going to be the more thoughtful the community, the bigger the population is. And part of the legislation that came through was you can't move them, or we've only issued one summons. So out of that 110 number Zero, I'm sorry. I don't have my glasses. or my
Sorry,
contacts on.
Manager Hoffman, zero from the chart process. There have been a couple of citations issued because of junk vehicles or RV or cars, but zero from the chart process.
And so we were, again, it's not having that pendulum on either side, but again, being really methodical when we deploy the cross-functional team from public health, from human services, from the police department. That chart group, they're all in constant communication. Park and Rec is part of that as well. So when we deploy that, it's from a service industry perspective and a community safety perspective. But we don't issue unless we have a place for them to go by law. So you can't say you just need to go somewhere. By law, you can't do that. So it's not just, I don't want it to seem like Broomfield is honorable, although we are. By law, you have to have some additional option, and then it's up to them. All you need to do is offer that voucher for someplace else for them to go. And then that service level afterwards.
Great. Thank you, Manager Hoffman. I appreciate the additional context there. And then one last question. When it comes to assistance for income aligned housing or units, the one specifically for sale, is there any assistance when it comes to the mortgage rate? How is that kind of affordable? I mean, I'm thinking right now about what my mortgage rate is on the house I just closed on, and it is high up there.
In short, no. We're not considering any subsidies for that in particular, but the often employed resource or program to really help those homeowners is mostly through that down payment assistance program, just to help cross that initial barrier and get their foot in the door. But no ongoing program proposals for assistance on that.
Really? Okay, well, thank you for the answer. Those are all my questions, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshallson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one question for Director Casey and then several questions for housing. Director Casey, you talked about the voucher program and the costs to that. And I know that the Metro Area County Commissioners Group has been talking about a regional approach. Have we looked at, we don't have a housing shelter in Broomfield. Have we looked at a regional approach to that rather than just the voucher program?
Councilmember Marshallson, thanks for the question. The quick answer is yes. We is kind of the hard part for it. In Broomfield, we haven't considered building or putting a shelter in Broomfield. Regionally, we have talked about it. We participate in groups with Adams County, with Jefferson County, again, the Metro Area County Commissioners. Aurora and Arapahoe County have been doing some of this work already. We're trying to learn from them and our core team with Adams County. But yes, there has been consideration for how can we mitigate some of these exorbitant costs when it comes to hotel vouchers. And if you collectively put all of the counties together that are providing hotel vouchers, that money could potentially go to building some kind of a shelter. Those are all in conversation stages right now. Every community, every municipality, every county has a different opinion and perspective on that. So the short answer is yes, then there's the longer part of that answer.
Has that conversation also included transportation? Because obviously if you do a regional shelter of some sort with Adams County, it could be far enough away from Broomfield that.
Yeah, again, insightful questions. That's been brought up because it's the same thing with a lot of our other programs, right? Detox or crisis or whatever. If you have a shelter and it's 20 miles away, how do you get folks there? We have dabbled with some of the things even during our swap when we enact our swap program, using things like Lyft or more of a ride sharing program. But yeah, those conversations have come up. And then it's also strategic. Where does it get placed? Is it closer to an RTD location? Are there services close by? Those types of things. So yeah, I think collectively, all of those things are considered.
Thank you. In relation to housing, you mentioned the inclusionary housing ordinance, Ms. King. Do we know that has the ratio between cash and lieu versus building units, has that changed since we changed our ordinance? And do we know by how much?
I can provide some specific numbers in follow-up. But yes, we feel that it has shifted, at least through all the conversations that we're having with developers proposing projects. We are seeing a lot of, like I said, hybrid proposals where folks are trying to provide a little bit of that on-site affordability, we think, in order to somewhat buy down, so to speak, their cash and lieu payment, because we increase that cash and lieu.
Okay.
But yes, I'm happy to provide the specific numbers.
Thank you. And then I apologize, I stepped out for a second. So you may have addressed this regarding the senior property tax refund program that we established last year. Have we exhausted the dollars that we allocated for that?
No, we have not. So I believe the original expectation was roughly $500,000 in 2023, 500,000 in 2024. With the expectation we'd probably have to roll over some of those 2023 funds into 2024. That is indeed what happened. So much so that we almost have close to the full $1 million for 2024, which we all expect to need that full amount given the increases in property taxes. So we anticipate using all of those funds in 24.
And that was my follow-up question. Do we expect the number of applicants to probably jump next year with the new assessments?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And then my last question is, you mentioned the proposal for to introduce the support for renters.
Yes.
Why are we proposing that to only do that for low-income seniors and not the general population?
Dollars.
Yes. Lack of resources, constrained resources, and really just prioritizing, again, going back to that shifting change in the demographics that we see in the 2023 needs assessment. We are seeing that senior population increase. We saw it increase over the last decade, and we expect that trend to keep continuing.
So it says 100,000, 250,000 a year for the seniors. Do we know how much that would be if we did open it up to the general population? For AMI, obviously assistance.
No, and the reason we didn't calculate that out is we're going to have to reallocate funds just to cover the seniors, let alone opening that up. So it wasn't an additional level of work because it's simply cost prohibitive. And again, with the we're finding, and it's not anecdotal. Mayor Pro Tem and I've had this this conversation about what the application looks like, what the viability looks like, extending from the 60% to the 80% and trending and targeting not only what that amount is, but the number of folks. So not just because our demographics are growing from a senior perspective, but really those seniors that have been here in Broomfield are the reason that so many other people want to move here, because they really have built the Broomfield. So from a priority perspective, those seniors are really what not only what our focus is for the next 2 years, but that line item is just key.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. These are all great questions here. It was a pleasure to join you guys at the Almost Home meeting that we had with them, and at the Housing Insecurity Forum with you all as well. That was a pretty intense session. We had a lot of people, all hands on deck, and we were able to kind of put Post-it notes up of where our gaps are, right? We said, all right, where do we serve? So I serve in the Broomfield Resettlement Task Force, and I served in that role that day. And we just kind of talked about what AMI do we serve, so that hopefully I'm assuming that informed this information. And then serving on the CSBG board, when we talk about seniors, one of the things I don't know why I didn't realize it at the time, but it's true that seniors just don't have always an additional set of income to a lot of them. Could be on disability or they just can't work, or they just are in that position. And so that's one of the reasons why we have more help for our seniors. Plus, even our affordable housing units that we have in Broomfield are increasing in rent. So they are increasing the rent on our seniors, and I think that's something that's important to kind of talk about. I did want to circle back to that question though earlier, that Council Member Marsh Holshan asked about senior property tax refunds. I could have sworn online they said that it's closed for 2023 because someone had emailed me yesterday about it, and I just wanted to know what does closed mean at this point?
Thank you, Councilmember Henkel, for allowing the clarification there. So the 2023 program was open from, I believe it was February through the end of June. And that was basically to align with when the property tax bills are due. So folks could pay their property tax bill, apply to the program, and then be able to secure the refund. So in the second half of the year, because again, those property tax payments are not due, then the program comes offline, but they are able to apply in 2024 for that increase that we'll all see on the property tax bill next year.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. And then I had an affordable housing developer contact me, and I think they kind of disagree with us, or maybe I just need some more clarification. When we talk about, I need to find it again. When we talk about the pipeline to develop affordable housing, I might have to reread this part of the agenda. But can you explain that part? And he mentioned, I don't see a problem with the pipeline, with it's Proposition 123, I think. So he said, I don't see a problem with that. What problems do we see as a city and county though?
That's a big question. Councilmember Hinkle, tell me what I'm not getting the question. I apologize.
I think he is just disagreeing that there is like a hiccup in the pipeline. I might have to look up the word pipeline in this thing when it talks about that proposition.
If you could maybe offline send us what you're looking for. I can Proposition 123, we met as a team, and then the fundamental questions. I think again, from a developer's perspective, developers love Proposition 123. Of course they do. So from the fundamental questions about the base, how many units do you have right now? How are they calculating the base? And it's a philosophical conversation. The DOLA was kind enough to get on the phone with us. We met with 4 of them at the end of last week to really go through those big 3 questions. So as a community, at the fundamental, but the bottom line is whether it's pipeline or baseline or anything else, we can't meet the 9%.
Or the 90 days. Is that what they're talking about?
Yeah, he mentioned this just in an email because on our agenda item, it just says Prop 123. The challenges of 123 include baseline with naturally occurring affordable homes and lack of a pipeline to meet the 3% required growth of affordability within the year. So I just wanted to know like what the pushback is on that. So yeah.
So again, it's a bigger, and it's not pushback. The bottom line is based on the units that we have, that are coming online, we won't meet that. State knows that we won't meet it. Other municipalities know that they won't meet it. And DOLA's response is do it anyway. Because there's no clawback for those dollars. So essentially, if you sign up knowing that you're not going to meet, and again, it's counterintuitive to anything that we've ever done before. So if we know that we can't meet something, we wouldn't put our names into trying to achieve that only not to meet it, right? So from council's perspective, it would be, well, if you know that you can't meet that 9% cumulative, right, over those 3 years, where the state is saying, even if you don't think you can meet it, fire at it. So it's a communication on the front end to say, not only do we not think we can meet it, But based on their base, we're not going to meet it. But they want us to be in that program anyway. So again, it's more of a philosophical conversation about if we know that we can't meet it. And we join anyway. What's the harm? That's the fundamental question. So we'll.
Know of a city and county or where that would benefit from this that does have it?
I don't know where everybody else is. I mean, everybody's across the map. It'd be. I don't know where everybody else's, everyone else's counts are. Only what ours is.
That is a continuing. I knocked myself out of my own time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, staff, for the presentation and all of your work on this. You know, I would say I came in with a few questions. I have even more, so I'll try to get through them as quick as I can. But first, a statement. I would just say that, you know, when the weather turns cold, I have many residents reach out to me and ask me, you know, what are we doing for our housing insecure residents during these very cold times? And they're always very impressed with the work that the city and county does to ensure that there is compassion given to those residents of Broomfield. So appreciate all the work on that. Regarding the chart committee, you know, housing insecurity isn't just a Broomfield issue, isn't just an issue for Broomfield residents, but residents of neighboring jurisdictions. How do the numbers that you presented tonight compare with those neighboring jurisdictions? And do we see that there are some programs that some of those neighboring jurisdictions have implemented that might be a good fit for Broomfield?
Thank you, Councilmember Schaaf. Yeah, there's a lot there. So yes, you are absolutely correct. When we're dealing with our individuals experiencing homelessness, they don't know the borders. They don't know if I'm in North Glen or if I'm in Thornton or if I'm in Broomfield. I would say that our numbers across, and I know mostly about Adams and Broomfield. I don't know about Boulder and Jefferson as well. They've got 500,000 residents. We've got 76,000, and I would say correlative, they're about the same. I have a lot of swap numbers that I can help to prove that point. Also philosophy, right? So when I said our chart team, we don't go out in search of, we're not trying to find folks that are homeless in Broomfield, but when we do know about them, we address it. I know, for instance, other communities have like rangers that actually their role is to go out and do street outreach and find their unhoused encampments. So it would be really hard to give you an apple for apple comparison. But I think generally, as far as the stats go, we're about the same as our other communities based on similar size, right? Programs, that's another thing. And that's what we talked about, the regional approach, because there's pockets of things that are done really well. If you asked me that question 5 years ago, I would say, yeah, Denver and Boulder have all the programs, send everybody there. And about that same time, 5 years ago, Boulder said, time out, there's no more room at the inn. We can't do this. We're overwhelmed and inundated. But there are a lot of programs that do show some potential success, right? I think, again, philosophically, that's a big conversation to say, do we start with the housing first model? Do we start with the substance abuse model? Do we start with the, you know, whichever path you want to go down? We're kind of evaluating all of that right now. A lot of times I stole this from a former colleague of mine. We go to the banquet or we go to the potluck and we bring our world-class macaroni and cheese, but we don't share it. And I think that goes on. If you have too great of a program, then everybody's going to want to use it or send their folks there. Or if you don't have anything, you want to send your folks there, right? So in Broomfield right now, again, I'm kind of dancing around this longer question. We don't have a lot. We don't have transitional housing. We don't have rapid rehousing. Those are the things that are evidence-based that are showing success. Almost Home is our partner on a lot of those. We're working on a plan with them to start improving. What can we do? Can we partner with Fish or Precious Child or the Refuge to put together a rapid rehousing program? Again, resources, dollars, those kind of things also come with that. Our neighbors in Adams County have been more than gracious to us. They've allowed us to join their meetings. They've provided resources to us. They've helped us. Same thing with Denver. We've had a few of our own Broomfield unhoused that have found housing out of programs out of Denver. So we're trying our darndest to make sure that wherever those pockets of success are, we're aiming people that way. And then whatever we can provide on our side, we do. And I say that kind of whatever we can provide on our side, we do. It's a limited what we can provide in Broomfield for our, specifically our street homeless, our unsheltered, unhoused. So I don't know if that answered, but that was a long way around the question.
No, I appreciate the answer and all the information. Some of our programs that we have in Broomfield, but we do contract out with neighboring communities. Are we still contracting with a neighboring community for shelter use?
We are not.
Or not? Okay. Do we provide any support to neighboring communities for shelter use for Broomfield residents?
We do not.
Okay. Let's see, so shifting gears a little bit to the senior partial property tax rebate program. So it looks like that, from the website and the presentation tonight that, all intent is to continue this program for 2024. But it doesn't look like the program analysis will occur until the summer of 2024. So does that mean that, we will continue this first year pilot program for another year? Is that just because we don't, and the reason that we don't have enough information we won't do the program analysis until the summer of 2024 is because there isn't enough data off of this first year pilot program?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Schaaf. I think we have a fair amount of data from the program this year. We had about 194 applicants, I believe, and approved just over 100 households. However, given the stark differences in the property, the program really refunds the delta or the change between the previous year's tax bill and the current year. So the folks who are receiving the refunds this year really saw small increases or deltas. We expect obviously that to change significantly for next year's bill. So between really those two ends of the spectrum, we felt that the 2 years of data was a better data set to look at the program overall. But also, I believe, if I remember correctly, when presenting the program originally to council, we had anticipated it being a 2-year pilot. So we really just wanted to let that pilot run its course through that initial 2-year period and then reevaluate and see what we might need to do for future years.
Okay, thanks for that response. I'm fine with that, and I'm fine with looking at that as a 2-year program instead of just a 1-year program.
Councilmember Schaaf, if I may, and one of the things that anytime you say pilot project, it's using the one-time dollars, which we always, excuse me, we try to stay away from. So what we don't want to have happen, once we analyze it, we look at the data, and then we have the data informed decision on what that amount should actually be. We don't foresee this being a pilot project. Our recommendation to council is that we continue this line item for those seniors to continue to cover that gap. Under what circumstances is really what the data will drive, but not having that be a pilot project, particularly because we know that delta that all of our seniors and community members will see coming in 2024 and 2025 will remain. So there isn't going to be a rollback. Even if, 303 and 304 pass, you'll have a temporary timeout, but it will be minuscule, about $160 a month, a year, I'm sorry. So again, that big jump will continue to be reflected as we move forward. So the recommendation is that it is not necessarily, no, that's redundant, not necessarily, but that it isn't in fact a pilot project, that we continue to fund that for our seniors as we move forward.
Okay, yeah, and I think that, regardless if we continue it or not, it would be great to get that information so that we can see what has changed, what impacts are being made, and how to continue to improve that program.
Mayor Pro Tem, we've discussed that very same thing from that data-driven perspective. So all of that is being tracked, and Vivi's doing a yeoman's job on those spreadsheets to make sure that we fully understand the households, the composition of the households, the income of the households and what that delta is. So there's a lot of tracking that's going on.
Thanks. Just a few more questions. Looks like I have hopefully enough time. The down payment program for middle income households. It seems like this is a new program. I don't recall seeing that in the memo. So if I missed that, apologies for that. But in the slideshow, that was kind of the first time I'd seen that. When will we be getting more specifics about that program? Especially because it is a $1 million budgeted line item.
Thank you for that clarification. I think we did include that, at least in the memo version that I have, so we'll
Okay.
make sure that.
Sorry, I missed that then.
That's quite all right, and just make sure that we have the right memo version, but yes. To your point, yes, it's a expensive task to help subsidize down payment costs for folks. So we and I'm sorry, I missed the middle part of your question. If you could repeat that without jumping into your time.
No, that's right. Just when do you expect that we'll get more specifics about that
Yes,
program?
thank you. My understanding is once staff has a fleshed out program to bring to council and propose, that we would have to bring that forward as the same type of proposal that we brought forward for the tax refund program, for example. So essentially getting the authorization to spend that housing development fund for that purpose.
Okay, all right. I look forward to that then. So one of the things that I'm looking forward to is the next housing needs assessment, and especially based upon some of the highlights that we've gotten. I really think that there's a big need. So we're talking about AMIs in Broomfield from 30% to 120% AMI. I just looking through the 2018 housing needs assessment, one thing that was lacking was kind of that human context in terms of all this numbers and data. And so I think that it would be more that it would be helpful to our and maybe even impactful to our stakeholders as well as our residents, which are stakeholders as well. To really humanize that context of those numbers. So when we're talking about somebody that's making 30% AMI, what does that look like? Is that an individual? What kind of industry is that person working in? 120% AMI, again, what is that? So if we can humanize that context a little bit more, just so that there's more of a human individual behind these numbers as opposed to these numbers just kind of floating out in space. I think that would be very helpful. And then the last question I had was regarding there was a quote in here: Broomfield is not yet on pace with the metro area and our neighboring communities in the share and production of single family attached 2 to 4 unit buildings. So I'm curious, with this 2 to 4 unit buildings, how is this housing being created in these other communities, and what more can Broomfield do to attract this type of housing?
Thank you for the opportunity to answer that. I can't speak necessarily to the other communities. In Broomfield, we've tried to address that a little bit through the updates to the inclusionary housing ordinance by diversifying the on-site unit requirements based off of product type and distinguishing that there is that middle ground between a multifamily product and a single family product, and including a separate requirement for that townhome product. We're hoping to elicit a few more of those types of units being offered on site in those projects. So we are seeing for our for sale properties, we are seeing those products being introduced on site. So with Palisade Park through Lennar, Dillon Point, Grandview, those are all that townhome product, and we're encouraged to hopefully see that trend continue.
Okay. Yeah, I just think that, it would be interesting to find out, if that is going to be, if that's being compared between us and our neighboring and the rest of the metro area, it would be interesting to find out how those units are being created in those other communities, if that's through upzoning from existing single family lots, or if that is new developments. And I just think that we need to get that information so that we know how those neighboring communities are addressing that and how we can better do that. So thank you, Mayor. That's all the questions I have.
Okay,
Mayor, if I just may really just quickly, Councilmember Shaw, and part of that's going to be the continuing conversation about Senate Bill 213, right? So one of the things from a unique perspective with Broomfield, when we're comparing any of the other neighboring municipalities or counties, we have 34 square miles, 40% of it is set aside that you all will hear about tonight for our open space. So again, it's not apples to apples, right? It's fundamentally, it's not necessarily new development, and the new caveats being put on new developments, whether it's the second reading of sprinklers that are coming or any of the other caveats that we place on new developments, also have a place for further conversation about the rate with which they will be built, particularly if it's attainable. So upzoning, it's a combination between upzoning and new land, open land development. But for us, it will more than 60% will be upzoning, simply because we're 80% built out. And that 20% isn't 20% of the 34 square miles, right? It's 20% of the 60% that's already developed. So it's density and it's infill. And we all know that's everybody's favorite kind of development is density and infill. You got to go up, right? So that, and that footprint and expenses continue to go through the roof on any one of these construction. So getting the land is exponentially more expensive. The constructions, it's the one, I don't want to say saving grace, but one of the benefits of infill is the primary infrastructure is already established. But also with Senate Bill 213 that we need to be conscientious of is when you have a community like Broomfield that has been based on single family homes, those pipes and infrastructure is very different than the piping and infrastructure that is required for multifamily homes. So that's an additional thing that we need to be cognizant and really mindful of as we move forward.
You can always do a second round, Councilmember Schaaf, if something else comes to you. Thank you. Councilmember Lim.
I think most of my questions have been asked. If this is premature pending the program analysis, let me know. But I did notice in the partial property tax refund program that there were 194 that applied and 104 were approved. Do you have any general feel for what, was there misinformation on the part of those that applied, or what was the situation in general?
Sure. Good evening. I'm Viviane Del Pizzo with the Housing Division. About 79 applications withdrawn from the program. And it's just because this year they wouldn't see a refund. So they started the application and they realized that the refund is based on the Delta. And they decided to just not move forward. So this year we're really used for a lot of outreach. We hosted a lot of in-person clinics with our partners at Broomfield Fish, the library, the community center. Applicants came and filled out applications in person with us. So I feel like the program is really established for success, especially next year when they were going to see that increase. I'll say we connected with probably double this amount of applications that came in. It's just a lot of residents decided to not go through the process this year and hold off till next year.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate, you had done, we had heard reports of how much stakeholder, interaction you had done to reach out to the population. So I appreciate that. The only other thing I've left to comment with the senior housing emphasis, we had a discussion at ACES just with this July meeting, and ACES is likely moving forward in August with some outreach on a partnership with Excel on residential home energy visits, which again tries to keep the seniors in energy efficient homes. And so this will help them with weatherization at the same time that helps the sustainability goals of the city. So I just wanted to plug that's coming from ACES and the Sustainability Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be quick since most of the questions have been asked, but I wanted to revisit SWAP briefly. And I think we all should be very proud of that program, and I'm sure it's saved lives. But could you put in context 132 residents, everybody we came in contact had some connection to the community. No one was from outside our community. I'm not sure how you establish residency.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Councilmember Cohen. I think when I said earlier, we figured out how to iron out some of our wrinkles. I think when initially it started and it got so cold so quick, there may have been a few that slipped through that maybe were not Broomfield, long time recipients of benefits or lived in Broomfield previously, but by and large, those 132 through the questionnaire and through the intake process that we do for SWAP, there has to be that connection to Broomfield. So did they live previously in Broomfield? Did they receive services in Broomfield? Do they have relatives? Do they have a child in school in Broomfield? So there's ways that we establish that those are actually Broomfield residents. Again, is that data 100% accurate? Probably not, but I would guess that we're close. I also know that our PIT count numbers, our point in time count numbers have come out, and we're at about 79 unsheltered on that one night. If you look at our data from our systems, our CVMS systems, McKinney-Vento, Clinica, those type of things, that 132 seems about right.
So if you're identified as being from another community, what's the process?
I'm sorry.
If you're identified as not being from or having connection to our community.
Yeah, they would, we would refer them over to the other intake site at Adams.
Okay.
And then Adams would, yeah.
Okay. It sounded like from the data that there's a fair amount of recidivism in the sense that you said 641 vouchers and over 2,600 hotel stays. So that'd be about 20 nights on average. Is that correct? So these are people who have chronic homelessness issues, not necessarily once or twice.
Yeah, correct. And I am so glad you started asking these questions because I pulled a whole bunch of data specifically from the last time I was here for you, because I knew that these questions would come up. So hold on one second. Let me kind of shuffle through my papers here. So we had 132 vouchers, or I'm sorry, 132 residents, 641 vouchers. 237 of those vouchers, or 37%, had guests. Again, there was 2,647 nights of shelter. And then we also have, bear with me for a moment, I'll go through some of this high level data very quickly for you. One of the other intake questions they ask is about chronic health. So 190 or 119 responded to this question. 61 said they did not have chronic health problems. 40 said they did. Mental health was an issue. 66 said that was false. 35 said that was true. Physical disability, 67% said false. 34% said true. Again, these are 119 that responded to that question. And the numbers won't exactly jive because everybody didn't answer every question. Length of homelessness I thought was interesting, and this is specifically for folks that were Broomfield. 34 folks reported that they had been homeless for less than 6 months, and 2 people reported that they had been homeless for 6 months to 2 years, and that was the only responses we got on that question. But less than 6 months, and looking at Adam's data as well, it seems like a lot of our unhoused are within the last 6 to 12 months. This was clients that were employed. Unemployed, there were 100. Employed, there were 31. Any source of income. So this was whether they were employed or receiving benefits or Social Security or disability. 61 said no, 37% said yes. And then again, this is a larger set of data, but for Broomfield, one of the questions is which city did you sleep in last night? In 2022, 29 folks said Broomfield. And in 2023, 121 of that 132 said that they had slept the night prior in Broomfield. And this is unsheltered. So this is tents, tarps, cars, RVs. Where did you sleep last night in Broomfield? 65% said a car or an RV. 24% said streets or tent. 5% said motel or hotel. 4% were doubled up. And then there's a portion of other, and that's typically hospital or incarcerated. And then the last set of data I have is county of last permanent residence. So again, for this year, we had 25 individuals report that Broomfield was their county of last residence. In comparison, this is aggregate totals of everyone. Adams had 265, Denver had 25, Jefferson had 18, out of state 26, Arapahoe 11, on and on. So you can see the bulk of them are Broomfield and Adams County that were participating in the SWAP program.
And these are adults, all of them.
I wouldn't say all of them. Again, that 37% voucher with guests, it's hard. You'll understand this without a data sharing agreement to get very specific detail. But I know that there definitely are some children that were involved in some of our shelter stays.
Okay. So in summary, majority of the people we came in contact with wouldn't fit the stereotype of someone with mentally challenged or drug addiction, but people who were economically challenged.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay. And one quick question on that note, since it's based on temperature and we're in an era of extreme temperatures. I have family in Florida, Texas, and Arizona who I'll be not visiting any day soon. But and we're lucky this year that we're on the cool end of that and the wet end of that, but things could change, unfortunately. Is there any thought that if we do get to a heat situation like Phoenix and the Southwest are affecting, because I know there's cases of people with third-degree burns and heat exhaustion issues happening in those states. Would we consider doing something similar if we ever got to that situation?
Yeah, I think if we ever got to that situation, we would definitely consider it. I know that also we do have those conversations. We had that conversation at our SWAP summit with Almost Home, and thinking about other alternatives too. Typically that's in the middle or later part of the afternoon when it's incredibly hot. Evenings aren't that bad in Colorado. So, other locations, other businesses, libraries, rec centers, our building, other places where folks can go to get out of that heat. But yeah, we have had those conversations about a cooling shelter. I know that the refuge also is open several days out of the week, and folks can go in there and get a meal and a shower and cool off if it's too hot.
Terrific. Thank you. And I just had one last real quick. I just wanted to sort of address what I think Councilmember Delgadillo was trying to get at, was in terms of, we have a fair number of services for seniors facing housing issues. But the real missing middle are the young working adults, I think, in terms of finding housing. I know there's a lot of people who have young adults who live at home because they can't find affordable housing, but I don't know if there's been any discussion, that 30% AMI includes a lot of working adults who would like to find an apartment and live in Broomfield, but can't. So I don't know if there's any strategies being thought of, or maybe that's something we could address in the future of how to address that specific unit who, property tax rebates aren't going to help. And a number of the other programs won't really speak to them.
Thank you. The housing division is not currently looking at the 30% spectrum specifically. There are some services and programs available through Dan's team of housing services, and then through the Broomfield Housing Alliance with the voucher program, of course, and what may hopefully be expanded through the state program, but we'll see what's to come with that.
All right. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. On that note, I, along with council members, Lim, Marshallshan, and Delgadillo, and Kristen and Rachel, attended the grand opening ribbon cutting for the Crosswinds at Arista, which is truly exactly what you were talking about for folks earning 30 to 60% average median income. And I met some of the residents, a young couple. She was expecting, they're probably mid-20s. So we're trying to fill that gap, and they're taking applications now still. I think they said they had about 100, and there's 159 units. So Crosswinds at Arista is the name of the property, if anybody's looking, and that's truly affordable and it's beautiful. So next we'll go to Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple questions. I think Ms. King, you were the one that gave that presentation about some of the properties that are coming online. You mentioned the bridges at Flatirons. How many did you say of the affordable units or income aligned units were rented out so far?
I believe all of the income aligned units have been rented out at Bridges at Flatirons.
Okay. And how do, I guess, how do people know that a certain property has income aligned units or does not have income aligned units? Because I know when I was looking for apartments last year, I didn't know that Bridges and Flatirons had income aligned units until Representative Lindstedt, and at the time Councilmember Lindstedt, pointed it out.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Ward. We are doing somewhat of a joint marketing effort in certain circumstances with these properties. So the properties themselves are responsible for doing some targeted and affirmative marketing and outreach to those communities that would be interested in the income aligned units, as well as some marketing that we have on the Broomfield website as well through the housing division.
Okay, thank you. My next question relates back to one that Councilmember Schaaf brought up earlier, and that is the trying to find it again, the support housing mobility and upward growth. And it's fine if you say that you don't have the information right now. I think you kind of hinted at that, but that deferred down payment assistance, what does that look like? I mean, do you have to, obviously, I would assume you have to buy a home in Broomfield. How do you have to own it for a certain period of time? Do you, like, what would that interest rate be for the loans and stuff like that? If you don't have that information because you haven't gone that far, that's fine. I understand.
No, I do appreciate the question, and you're right. We don't have all of the specifics ironed out for what we would ultimately propose. We have done a significant amount of research with several service providers in the Denver metro area that offer these types of down payment assistance programs. So typically, there are parameters within all of those program guidelines to address each of those items that you just mentioned. And essentially it acts like a soft second on the property for the homeowner. But yes, there would be expectations for length of ownership, et cetera. And that goes along with it being ultimately a repayable loan, but it's just deferred.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does staff know roughly when that proposal would be coming before council? I assume in a study session.
We do have to coordinate, of course, with the city manager's office and our team to find to squeeze in some time on the agenda to propose that to council. But we hope to do that in hopefully short order so that we can get this up and running if council agrees sometime next year.
Right, wonderful. Thank you. Those are all my questions, Mayor.
All right, thank you. And Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question. This is just regarding the property tax refund program. When this was first proposed, I did express some concerns with potential abuse of the program. So I certainly appreciate the analytics that you plan on doing after the 2-year period. I was wondering just if anecdotally you have any idea of where the applications and where the approvals have come from community-wise to different neighborhoods. And then also just making sure that you do keep track of that when you're doing the analytics for next year.
Thank you for that question. I actually have a map. We
Hey.
can pull up. It's the last.
Right after your question.
Map. So thank you. It's like 29, Kyle. And we are analyzing a lot of different factors. So neighborhood, AMI percentage, household members. To qualify for the program, it's a lot of documents that we require to make sure that, you know, they are meeting within the requirements of the program. That's why we had a high percentage of withdrawn applications, because they didn't want to go through the process if they weren't seeing the refund yet. But we have a very thorough process, even within our department, of 2 people checking the application to make sure that only those that really qualify get the refund.
Great.
And then when we have that map, there you can see, those are the 104 households that were approved for the program. And you
Okay.
can have just a general picture of concentration of where most of the applications
Okay,
are.
I think that looks great. Yeah, it definitely seems to be spaced out in specifically the neighborhoods that probably do need it the most.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, was that it? Mayor Pro Tem? I'm
That's
sorry.
it. I'm good.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Sorry, I was multitasking. All right, Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. I did notice on the map that there was kind of like this desert area, particularly towards Ward 5 of affordable housing. And I had a few people just sort of think of ideas, and I don't know if the Broomfield Housing Alliance is going to do this, but are there any plans to buy any existing housing to make those places affordable, you know, because it seems like we have certain clusters. We are making really good progress in a bunch of different areas. But I do notice that there's an affordable housing sort of desert in an area.
Thank you for that question. The housing division doesn't have any current plans, but I'm happy to invite Kristen Heiser up if she'd like to address it for Broomfield Housing Alliance.
Hotspot.
Councilmember Hinkle, just as a reminder, that map, that's not affordable housing. That's just where the applications for the senior tax rebate came from.
Yeah, I think, okay, yeah, I'm getting the two mixed up, but I do know that we have a lot of, you know, areas where we don't have affordable housing. So I'm just curious, particularly in Ward 5, I would, you know, we'll own up to that in Ward 5 for sure.
Good evening, Kristen Heiser, Executive Director of the Broomfield Housing Alliance. Thank you for the question. I think the Broomfield Housing Alliance is willing to look at any strategy that helps meet our affordable housing goals, income aligned housing goals here in Broomfield. I will say that buying individual single family homes is very resource intense. And so for us to be able to have the financial resources to compete on the open market for homes and then to maintain those homes, deal with the asset management, selling of those homes, it's just a very resource intense type of program. But if that's something that suits our community, I think us working with the Division of Housing to determine how we might approach it that way, we would be very open to discussing that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I love the way like McKay is kind of set up where we have the single family homes, and then we have condos too. So that's just something to kind of think about. That's it, Mayor. Thank you.
Oh, but wait, thank
Oh.
you. Ms. Heiser. So do you remember that House Bill, was it 1155 or was it a Senate Bill 1155, Housing Authority First Right of Refusal?
Yes, that did not pass.
I know. Would that have helped?
That could have helped with multifamily properties, not so much single family properties. That was really focused on expiring tax credit properties and
Right.
larger apartment complexes.
Yeah, so it would have been helpful if the governor wouldn't have vetoed it.
I'm going to step away right now.
Right.
Where's the bus? Somebody's under it.
Truth. So, all right, any other council member questions? All right, well, thank you guys so much for the comprehensive update. I have a really good idea of where we are in the landscape, and thank you for all of your hard work helping our most vulnerable residents and those who need us. So I appreciate you all. Oh, we're going to take our 10-minute recess now, if you guys don't mind. It's 8:15. We'll be back at 8:25.
Mayor,
No, it's fine. We're all good. Welcome back. Okay, we had just finished with the housing item and we're moving on to item number 3. An update on the open space, parks, recreation and trails refresh and community engagement, 40% open lands goal and public land dedication. Our next item is an update on all that stuff.
And walking us through all that stuff is.
Walk you right on through. Good
Ms.
evening,
Pritz.
Mayor Pro Tem and council members. I'm Kristen Pritz, the Director of Open Space and Trails. And I'd also like to just introduce also my co-manager on this project, Clay Shuck, who is the Director of Operations. And Pete Dunleavy, our Open Space and Trails Manager, is here, and Anna Burton-Zetti, Community Development Director. All of us have been collaborating along with others on this project, so it's definitely been a team effort. Next slide, please. We're calling it a refresh because we really don't need to go back to zero. We have a 2005 master plan on these topics. We also have the 2016 comprehensive plan. So we're taking that data, updating it, and bringing in our community engagement and so on into the process. Tonight, there are 3 areas that we'd like to focus on. There are many other topics being discussed in this planning process, but the first one is community engagement, just giving you a brief overview of that. The second is 40% open lands goal. What is the status of that goal? And lastly, public land dedication, some very preliminary recommendations on how that public land dedication formula could be tweaked from what we've learned from the community. So those are the 3 topics. And what we'd really like to hear from the council on is, are the proposed approaches to the 40% and the public land dedication aligned with city and council goals? We are still in the preliminary stages, as I mentioned, but I think we want to know, are we on the right track here? Next slide, please. This just shows you where we are in the process. We began back in the winter of 2022. We're now in phase 2, middle of July. We're looking at the data we've gathered and developing our recommendations. Next slide, please. Community engagement really has been the centerpiece of this project, and it will continue to be that. Next slide, please. These are some photos of some of the events we've had where we've done community outreach for the project. Starting over here on the top left-hand corner, that was a Spanish and English Raptor program that we also incorporated information about the project at. We went out to Pacific Ocean Market, Durda Recreation Center there. And then on the bottom row, we were at Bike to Work Day, Brouhaha, and the Pride event, and many other events. Next slide. The orange circles on this slide show you where our events were during that first part of the process in the project. The green areas, those circles, show you QR codes that we put at particular locations that are very active: trailheads, parks, the library, and other locations where people tend to gather. So they could just scan that with their phone, go to our Broomfield Voice page. That's in 5 different languages, and also eventually take the survey. Next slide, please. A brief summary of this survey. We had 819 responses, which is fantastic. We sent out 3,000 postcards to residents. We put information about the survey in utility bills, attended 3 senior lunches. So we really tried to reach out to a lot of different people. The idea was going out to where the community is, as opposed to having them come to meetings at the city and county building. We broke the survey results down into over age 65, families with children, identified as Asian, identified as BIPOC or multiracial, or Latinx, Hispanic, and respondents having income less than $50,000. And it was interesting just to see some of the differences among those groups. Next slide, please. We also did focus groups. The staff did not attend these. These were conducted by our consultants. We had one that was very active, athletics, recreation. The second was Spanish speaking group, a Spanish speaking group, and then a nonprofit advocacy, more, I would say, open space related group. And then lastly, developers, business owners, and housing services related folks together. Another big part of the community engagement was meeting periodically with our Open Space and Trails Advisory Committee and the Parks and Recreation Senior Services Advisory Committee. And throughout the process, they look at the data, kind of give us insights in what we perhaps missed and so on. Next slide. Just to give you a snapshot of some of this survey information, because there is a lot there and we don't have time tonight to go through all of this. We compared the 2020 survey results to the 2005 survey results, and there were some interesting bits of information. First of all, high priorities still included trail connectivity for recreation, but really for transportation too, an important aspect of it. Proximity of parks to residents' homes, restrooms, shelters, and shade continue to be important. Requests for more open space, and just in general, the use of these types of amenities is very high in Broomfield. There was less focus on buffers to the north and west of our community. Wildlife concerns were less, although coyotes still did come up. And large sport field facilities in larger park areas were less of a concern. I think some of that is back in the 2005 plan, we were just really completing and getting Broomfield County Commons finished with all those athletic fields and so on. New focus items, navigation, signage, mapping, wayfinding, very important. Safety, lighting in parks, crossings of our streets, wildlife, again, related primarily to coyotes, and vehicular conflict. In respect to accessibility, lower fees for income accommodation were mentioned, definitely multilingual information and signage, ADA access, adaptive access, and sports. Health, mental and physical health were deemed very important, and these amenities contributed greatly to the community's overall health in those areas, and also just social interaction with your neighbors and friends. Maintenance of the amenities, very important too. So that's just a quick review of some of the community engagement. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to delve into the topic of 40% open lands and where we are in meeting with this goal. Next slide. So the Broomfield planning area that we use for calculating this 4% includes two things. It includes the city and county boundaries, and it includes over 2,400 acres of Broomfield Boulder County IGA land that is outside of our borders. The 40% is taken from that number, 23,887. That 40% goal then is equivalent to 9,555 acres. So right now we're at 36% instead of 40%. The difference is basically 754 acres when you take out pending public land dedication and approved public land dedication. I think it's important to mention, what is the 40% open lands goal made up of? It's made up of public and private open space. It's made up of public and private park, and also open lands. So when you take those numbers together in those areas, and included in that area for open space is the 2,421 acres in the IGA lands that I mentioned. So that comes out to 8,600 acres and that 36%. Next slide, please. This map just shows you in general terms, where is our current open lands. You can see that up in the northeast portion of the community, east of I-25, there really is no green shown. Along US 36, there are some pockets where we don't have much green, and then out on State Highway 128, generally abutting the roadway there. There are some infill projects or parcels also in the community that's already developed. Next slide, please. This slide shows you opportunities for potential conservation of open space and parklands. These shaded circles are areas where some additional conservation could occur. That could be through public land dedication. It could be through acquisitions. But up in the northeast portion of the community, you have the Dry Creek, Little Dry Creek area. You have Preble Creek. You have the Bull Canal and other areas that are interesting historical or natural features in the community. When we came up with these potential locations, we did talk with the two committees about what the selection criteria should be, the acquisition criteria, reviewed those criteria with them, and then applied them to lands that were currently not developed. Next slide, please. So certainly an important aspect of this is what might this additional 754 acres cost? So rather than try to estimate what amount will be public land dedication, what will be paid for by acquisition or partnerships, just to give you a very simple, straight number, we took the average vacant assessor's cost per acre of $86,000, multiplied that by the 754 acres. And that comes up to $65 million. This would be something that would be looked at over a 20-year period. It's not something that you do in 5 years or anything like that. And given our current situation, just in open space, you know, it's taken about 28 years to get the open space that we do have. And that was just through acquisition. I'm not counting any public land dedication. Revenue sources that would typically be used for this kind of an acquisition cost would be the open space and parks sales and use tax. About 4.5 million to 6 million comes in per year for open space. Not only is land, but really all of the improvements related to open space are, for the most part, taken out of that revenue. For parks, the tax provides 1 million to 1.5 million, and other funding such as CIP funding and Conservation Trust Fund and so on are often used for park projects. The current balance in the cash in lieu right now is 3 million. Next slide, please. So the additional open lands can be achieved by a lot of different tools. It's not just acquisition. It can be acquisition, of course, but partnerships. For example, Metzger, we split the cost of that project 50-50 with the city of Westminster. Great Outdoors Colorado grants also have contributed to our open lands percentage. And of course, the public land dedication, actual land from the developer with the residential project has been very helpful. And then lastly, we have cash in lieu. Next slide, please. So I'd like to jump from that topic to the public land dedication. Next slide, please. And I really do want to emphasize that through the collaboration with a lot of the other departments, our focus group, our community engagement, research we've done with our consultant DTJ Design on this project, we've come to the conclusion that some changes are needed in the public land dedication. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what is the purpose? Why do we even do this? It provides equitable access to these amenities for all residents. It enhances the quality of life. It improves community and individual mental and physical health and overall wellness of our community, fosters social interaction, and it accommodates the demand for all of these types of amenities. And the private sector is helping with that challenge. It promotes a sustainable and healthy ecosystem for people and wildlife. It reinforces a strong community image. And at times supports the provision of school sites if those are needed in a particular area where we're having residential development. And lastly, it contributes to that 40% open lands goal. Next slide, please. Our current formula is based on 24 acres of open space and parks per 1,000 persons. So it's really a population-based formula, not just based on dwelling units. 8 acres of open space, 16 acres of park, that varies. We really just tend to look at the land and see what makes the most sense. 25% of that public land dedication is provided on site. The balance is handled through cash in lieu. Currently, our cash in lieu price per acre is $56,000. That's based on past open space and park land acquisitions. Next slide, please. This slide just gives you a quick graphic of what this looks like. So if you take the 24 acres times 300 people, let's say that's what the project on this 20-acre residential site generates, you end up with a PLD of 7.2 acres. 25% is on site. So that's 5 acres of the requirement, and the balance is paid in cash in lieu. So that's how the current formula works. Why are we proposing changes? So next slide, please. Here's some of the reasons that seem to make this a good idea. We're having challenges with those multifamily projects, as you well know from all of your development reviews. And this is particularly tough on those small sites where you have high density. There is a community desire to meet a variety of goals that are really important. Of course, income aligned housing that we just talked about, and sustainability are just examples of some of the other factors that we all try to consider when looking at development proposals. There is a desire to achieve equitable distribution of these kinds of facilities so that we don't end up with multifamily areas and income aligned areas of our community that do not have these amenities, but everybody else does. So that is a concern. We also feel that incorporating the public land dedication into the municipal code will be much more helpful for developers and for the staff and really clarify the rules. And then we listen to our developer housing business group and the community engagement to see how these things might be tweaked. Next slide, please. So we would like to keep the 24 acres per 1,000 formula. That is part of the preliminary recommendations. But we suggest that we reduce on-site public land dedication for sites that are 10 acres or greater from 25 to 20%. That same concept applies to townhomes and small lot single family. That's at 3,500 square feet. So 10 acres or greater, going from 25 to 20%. For multifamily sites and small lot single family, including townhomes that are under 10 acres, the percentage on site would go from 25 to 15%. For single family standard lots, and these tend to be 7,000 square feet lots, that's the minimum. We suggest just keeping the 25%, and in a way that discourages that type of development. And this approach, the intent anyway, is to try to encourage more compact development for our residential areas. The average cash and lieu price per acre is recommended to really be established by the assessor's data, looking at the average vacant land cost every 2 years. Next slide, please. I think I'm losing my voice, so I'll try to hang in here with you. The next topic is income aligned housing related to the public land dedication. This is such an important community goal. Equity comes into play here, where we want to have these amenities similar to the rest of the community for residents. that live in these areas. There also needs to be some adjustment to the public land dedication formula, given the challenges of providing quality income-aligned housing in our community. We have to balance. And so we think some changes are in order. For 100% income-aligned housing projects, a preliminary recommendation is to meet the on-site PLD requirement 15 to 20%. So, again, that's similar to what we just talked about for multifamily on that previous slide. So that would stay the same. But what we think really needs to change is the cash in lieu. If a project is 100% income-aligned housing and meets 60% or lower of the area median income, then the recommendation is to waive all of the cash in lieu for that type of project. It's one of the most difficult types of housing to provide from what we're learning. And Jeff Romine has been on our little subgroup working on this public land dedication topic and has been extremely helpful. And so we've been collaborating together. More work is necessary on this topic, but this is the direction that we're heading. For those projects that are not 100% income aligned, we would develop some type of a formula. Let's say they put 30% of their units in income aligned housing, then adjusting the cash in lieu in some manner that is equitable when we look at those projects. Next slide, please. We did really try to discuss these general concepts with our two committees. Here are some of the comments from them. I think there was agreement that the cash in lieu amount needs to be looked at. That for 100% income aligned housing, waiving that cash in lieu made a lot of sense. Another comment was that when we have public land dedication parcels in large areas, a large PUD, for example, that has perhaps different types of housing, that we try to put that park or open space area near the multifamily units that don't tend to have as much space to use. There was a comment to consider rooftop green spaces as long as there's public access. And then a question came up about what amount of land could we have bought if we just took that cash in lieu and only used it for land. I don't think we would meet the 40%, but we are going to just see if we can come up with some kind of a ballpark answer for that question that came up from a committee member. And then considering proximity of existing parks and open space when looking at projects is also an important factor, especially when you're under 10 acres. Next slide, please. We have additional steps here. We'll be meeting with the developer housing group again in July. August 16th, we have another joint meeting. August 21st, we are wanting to go back with our Spanish speaking group and follow up on their suggestions and tell them what we are proposing. We will be at Broomfield Days. We will have a tent right next to the City and County of Broomfield tent, and we'll be sharing our research and final recommendations there with the public. We have another joint meeting in October, and then we hope to bring the project to you towards the end of this year. It may end up being that first quarter, but that would be the latest. We really want to try to wrap this up. If the council does approve the public land dedication comments, and again, they'll require more work from what I've shown tonight, then we would suggest beginning work on a public land dedication ordinance. So with that, we are here for questions and comments, and I have our original question up there for your focus again. Thank you for your time, and this concludes our presentation.
Thank you for the very informative presentation, Ms. Pritz. That was great. You guys have been doing a lot.
It's been a team effort.
I know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Time to update everything. I'm going to start with Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to answer your question off the bat, I mean, at least for me, it's a definite yes. And I think you saw that in the one of your first slides, which shows what the public wants, and the public wants, I think one of the ones was more open space. So I can't see that being a no, you know, it needs to be a goal, whether or not we could ever make it there or not. At least for me, that's a big fat yes. Two questions. If you could explain to myself, because it's always confusing to me and maybe to some of my newer colleagues, what actually does open lands mean? Because that's different than parks and open space.
Yeah, let me grab a piece of paper here. So open lands is a term, really, it has a couple meanings. One is it's just combining the parks and open space to come up with that 40%, both public and private. But when we defined open space and we define park, open spaces generally our agricultural lands and our natural lands, drainages and things like that. Parks are more the irrigated turf areas. Open lands, there's some uses that just don't really fit into either. One might be a golf course, a cemetery, a trail corridor that is landscaped, but it's used for a trail. So it's not really just open space and it's not just parkland. So in some of those situations, we call those spaces open lands. The original slide shows a big umbrella with open lands on it because it is an umbrella term that really includes parks and open space.
Okay.
Both public and private, excuse me.
That's great. That makes sense to me. One thing I was concerned of, and from what you're telling me, the answer is no. It doesn't include like parking lots and stuff of that nature, does it?
Like a trailhead parking area, it would.
But how about a
Like-
parking lot for a business or a?
No.
Okay. So I remember many years ago when we get presentations that would, show the breakdown of the property and how much is how much is open space or open lands and how much is. I used to think that like it included the parking lots or the parking areas, and it just kind of maybe laugh. Maybe that's not the case.
I think there is a confusion sometimes, particularly with the development community, between open area, which is really kind of a site coverage term, versus open lands. And I think it's easy, maybe to get those two confused. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably where some of that comes from.
Okay, appreciate that. One other question is, and not understanding why we would want to reduce the PLD requirements. I mean, I get the sort of inherent conflict between affordable housing and open space, just because, from a developer standpoint, if the more open space, the less space to provide housing. And I mean, I get that, but in situations where there's not affordable housing, why would we want to reduce what we're asking? Because that does seem to be contrary to achieving our goals or if that is our goal for achieving open space, why would we want to reduce what we're asking?
So for multifamily, we are proposing that the public land dedication would be reduced. And also for these smaller single family and townhome properties that are on lots 3,500 or under. For more traditional or standard single family developments, we're really saying you keep the public land dedication as is. Those projects generally have not had problems meeting the public land dedication. When we looked at these recommendations, we also went back, I don't know, maybe 5-7 years and looked at what have we really achieved for multifamily projects and for some of these more townhome type projects. And just looking at the data, it seemed to be that these percentages were doable when you start adding up all the other challenges of building multifamily housing, particularly on smaller parcels, infill parcels. So we did look at that past data, and it just seemed to be, if we're going to put this in our code, let's figure out realistic percentages that developers can meet. The income aligned housing preliminary recommendations are really just a realization that we have to balance some of these things.
I understand that for the more affordable housing projects, but if someone's not providing affordable housing, I just I'm not sure why we'd want to. And I guess if we're going to reduce what we're asking from the, from a PLD standpoint, then I would want to increase the second part of that, which would be the cash and lieu part. So if it just doesn't make any sense because it's not practical to provide the open space because it's not there, it's just not gonna make any sense. But then let's at least get, give them an alternative. If an alternative is usually the cash and lieu, but I would say if we're going to reduce one, I would want to offset that by increasing the other. And again, this is in just a traditional community, not an income aligned housing, which I think by doing that also could potentially incentivize also the income aligned housing. If we have significant requirements for traditional housing, and maybe the break they get for the income aligned housing would encourage that to some extent. But
I guess I do want to make sure it's clear that with these multifamily projects, for example, that have the reduced public land dedication, there is still a cash in lieu amount.
right.
But I think what you're saying is with that reduction,
I want to offset it, right?
that-
Yeah,
yes,
if we're going to
offset it.
reduce how much they have to get, but let's increase how much that they have to
I see.
do cash and lieu on the other hand. Otherwise, we're just cutting back and I think that's, at least for me, that's the opposite of what the goal is, that the goal is to try to reach that 40%. And if we're just cutting back across the board, it makes it even harder to get to that goal. At least that's my takeaway from all this.
Thank you.
All right, my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a comment. So yes to all of it, and I do appreciate the incentives for density. Frankly, if we have the more people on the same size parcel, long-term, that'll help us with having more open lands. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lim.
Yes, maybe we could go back to that map of prospective additional open space parcels, or that maybe that would answer my question, but I couldn't see the details. So
Slide
where,
14, Kyle, please.
there we are. Thank you. Quick. So are there parcels identified east of I-25? Are we anticipating that far out? I can't tell where I-25 is there.
You are correct. On the map, the most right vertical line is our city and county boundary, and we do have some circles outside of the boundary there. Those would be typically a partnership, similar to what we did with Metzger. This is long-term thinking. So it would be Adams County that would join with us. There are some parcels too over in the kind of Boulder Weld County area in that northeastern portion of the community. So that is a possibility. We did not write those out of the options. And most of those were actually in our 2005 plan too.
Okay. In 2005, I don't know if we were thinking quite as much about all the wells that need to be P&A'd over there, but that kind of make a mess out of all of that in the future. But that's interesting then to think that we would have parcels there. So how much, anticipating that east of I-25 will get developed at some point, it seems like there could be a significant amount of acreage if you move around the P&A wells that would contribute to that final 4%. Is that, how significant of an amount would that be? Or are you anticipating?
I do think that's something that's hard to anticipate because it will depend on what kind of densities we have there. If it's, I think there's probably a likelihood that will be more multifamily development with commercial mixed in. But that area is about 1,800 acres east of I-25. That there are some residential areas out there and so on, just small, single family properties, farm sites, and a couple businesses. But that's about 1,800 acres in that area there. So certainly there will be some that will be gained from just public land dedication. And then perhaps some acquisitions can occur in that area too.
And Councilmember Lim, for timing purposes, we don't have infrastructure.
Yeah.
So that is,
Big factor.
it's a huge factor.
Um. The OSTAC comment on considering rooftop green spaces for public land dedication. Will that receive further discussion in OSTAC itself? Is that where that's headed?
I think so. And with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee too.
Okay, that's interesting. How much, do you have any data on how much we've already waived the cash in lieu for income aligned housing?
I'm sorry, I don't have that number. We could
Okay,
probably try to look at that with our planning staff and the housing staff.
okay, thanks. On the, then I had, on the community survey, being sensitive to the comments that for greater accessibility, that there were lower recreation center fees that would be helpful there. Could you address that? I guess that would not be you. Could that be addressed in some way to, since that was expressed as a concern in the community survey?
Thank you, Clay.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council. Thank you, Councilmember Lynn, for that question. We do have a reduced fee program that people can apply for now. We also had a program we're doing this year and probably into next year where we're providing middle school folks a free pass for them to come in the afternoon between 4 and 7. So we continue to look at those things. We do evaluate our reduced fee program every year to see what modifications that we need to make with that.
Okay, and thank you for that recap of those programs. In general, in case there's anyone who might think differently, does the recreation program pay for itself?
No.
Okay.
No, the program is subsidized. We're subsidized at about, so we bring in about 60% of our expenditures. So we're subsidized about 40% out of the general fund.
Okay, so that kind of address, I just wanted to bring that out to address that. And so if anyone has needs, please connect with the Recreation Center. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. This was a great presentation. It's very, very in-depth that I very much appreciate. And I think it all makes sense. The increasing the assessed to match the lands to assessed value makes sense. It's probably long overdue. I just want to say when we're looking at this 40% goal, it's still just a goal, but the quality is far more important than the actual quantity, because I've seen some questionable public land dedications where it's just kind of wasteland. And it's like, so we're looking at this equal district, like we want this equal distribution. It's really got to be focused on those desirable high quality lands. So, because it's like somebody could get something that just wasn't amazing. And I also want to clarify, we're talking about the affordable housing, and I think I'm agreeing with our Mayor Pro Tem. I'm on this whole, like, we don't want to, why would we reduce all those brackets? Like some of them, we can still have them at that 25% before they reduced. But so if we're taking away that, but then on the affordable housing, in order to help with the affordability, if we're taking away that public land dedication requirement, that would not in any way prohibit or preclude those areas from then ensuring that we have the open space, correct? It wouldn't be coming with, they wouldn't be doing the cash in lieu, but they would still be, the goal would still be to have that open space in some way near them.
Yes. The intent is to have a reduction in the on-site public land dedication, but still have some green space that, like you say, is valuable quality, provides a positive space and experience for the residents.
And so that's all my feedback, and just keep up the work towards the 40%, but really making sure, I mean, it was unfortunate. Some of it was, tainted by oil and gas development. Then it's like, all of a sudden, it's really not it's not really what residents were expecting. So I just think that high quality is the focus from here on out. Maybe we don't make the goal, but it's high quality land. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you. Again, appreciate the presentation. I think it's the second time I've seen it. But I still, along with the Mayor Pro Tem, I'm curious about the thought that we need to reduce the PLD for any multifamily project. It seems like there's no barrier to market rate multifamily coming to town. Is there, but I am intrigued by the idea of waiving the cash in lieu for if you truly are 100% or provide substantial lower income, 30%, 40% housing. Is there any thought to, maybe leaving the market rate alone, but further incentivizing through cash in lieu or other mechanisms, developers to do more low income housing? Because I would think that would make a bit of a difference in their margin in terms of the amount of land they can develop. If there's, as you said, parks nearby, or, this isn't an area that's lacking in open space.
Yes, I mean, in answer to your question, we're open to really hearing the council tonight and guidance and comments that you have.
Because I'm conflicted because I wouldn't want low income areas to have less open space. But maybe they are being built in areas near or close to, and then we could have some waiver process or some ability to measure that in a different way. But I guess I'm reluctant to reduce it for a market rate multifamily development. It doesn't seem, I'm not clear on the necessity.
Okay. Councilmember Cohen, there's been a lot of conversation about where to land on that. And outside of the affordable and the attainable, you have the number of units that the state of Colorado and Broomfield is just short. So part of that conversation was to have it apply across the board, but I think we would all be very open to saying we're only waiving it for affordable and attainable. It's counterintuitive because Senate Bill 213, right, is not just affordable and attainable. They're saying communities need more units and you need to go up instead of out, and you need to do that up zoning. And it's not attached to affordable or attainable. So that's where the mindset was building those units and having the caveats, but certainly walking back the other direction would not be a lift, would it, Ms. Pritz?
No, it would not. Thank you, Manager Hoffman.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, and it's always good to have a refresh. And I just really appreciate just throughout all of this is a lot of equity and a lot of just real thoughtfulness on this. And I love the idea that we're still doing more outreach. So that's really important. And as much as I would love to put even more open space up in Ward 5, I think that, we have to be really equitable across all of our wards for sure. But yeah, I do kind of salivate at that plot of land up there too. It's a nice, spot, but we know we'll probably have more high density up there. My only question for today is that I kind of wanted to know what happens as we get towards build out and we have 40%. We've hit that goal. What happens to that? Is a quarter of a penny sales tax? What do we do with that? Is that for more maintenance, upkeep? What do we do with that then?
The quarter-cent sales tax is in perpetuity right now. And that can be used for open space. It can be used for acquisitions, maintenance, and improvements. So building trails, building underpasses, picnic pavilions, that type of thing. And that's 80% of that tax. The 20% goes to parks, and that can also be used for park improvements, park acquisitions, and I also believe maintenance. And so when we would reach the 40% goal, and again, if we do, that money could then be used for improving or enhancing existing facilities, replacing old facilities, maintenance, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Marsh Holston.
Thank you, Mayor. Do we have any community gardens in Broomfield?
I can't list all of them myself, but we do. Some are with churches. We have them at the Bruner Farmhouse. We have a teaching garden there that is really looking beautiful right now. But there are other gardens too in the community.
I'm assuming those count as this open land part of that. Yeah.
Yes.
Is there a way we can encourage more of that? And especially like, so I'm thinking of like, I live across from Brandywine Park. I have a big sprawling park. My kids can go ride their bikes around the thing. It's safe for them. But then, today we were over in Arista and, they have little tiny pocket parks. And specifically thinking about like the Harvest Station side of 36 and all those new developments that we've approved over there. There's not really access to any park. I mean, you get the little pocket parks in there. They can't get over to the industrial trail, the ball fields because there's no, I mean, I guess we could spend a ton of money and dig a tunnel underneath the railroad tracks, but I'm just trying to think, is there a way that we can encourage more?
I just have to say, we are doing that.
We're
getting an incredible grant, thanks to Sarah Grant and her staff and others here.
That's great.
To build that underpass, so there will be a connection there. There will also be a park on the side of the creek that goes through the railroad tracks there. And some of the projects have small public land dedication parcels in that area. So that's kind of an exciting area where I think a lot of things are happening that are really positive.
Because I know we talked
Long
about
time coming.
former councilmember
Lindstedt.
Lindstedt had the park that he wanted over in there that kind of, wasn't an RTD land that we ran into issues with, so.
And there's a lot of, so two things, Councilmember Marsh Holston. One, there's a lot of conversations about CDOT and RTD taking inventory of a lot of their land that now, because of either development or the lack of access, what are they going to do with that land? So they're in the process of doing that inventory. That park and that underpass has been a long time coming in focus. And community gardens, a lot of conversation with the CSU extension. Community gardens are a lot of work. And so small, and so communities think, yes, let's have a community garden. There's a nice one by the detention center, the jail detention center. And I know Miss Roxy could probably comment also on the community gardens. Again, it's a lot of work, and you have to have very engaged community, so we can support it as a whole lot of it. But again, everybody loves to see them.
And just one question on this map. I noticed the circle around the 120th and Lowell. I'm assuming that's still drive-in movie theater. What's that circle refer to?
That refers to as potential acquisition. And it doesn't mean the entire site. It could mean a portion of it, but that is an idea for that area.
I know we've had constant reviews on potential development there, and I know the neighbors, specifically the ones directly adjacent to it, have asked us to make it a park instead. Is that something we're considering, or is that still?
Well, when the project has been coming through, then we hold off on those kinds of discussions because it's going through the development process. But it is a concept on this map.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't really have any questions. I appreciate the work staff has done as it relates to our open space and public lands dedication. I personally agree with everything that is proposed, other than maybe I might would like to see for the standard single family development that actually increase to further disincentivize such projects. But I do think you are trying to address one of the issues surrounding affordability and also just housing in general is that the open lands and public lands dedication does increase costs for developers, and it also removes land that could be built for housing. And obviously we as a council and as a city and a state have to find, I guess, that sweet spot of some sorts, which probably looks different for each one of us up on this dais, or me floating up here in the ether. But I do agree with what the staff recommendation is. Particularly, I was very impressed that you guys were looking at furthering or further reducing the public lands dedication if it's within a certain distance of an existing park or open space or something of the sort like that, because why put more in that one particular area if you already have something that can accommodate the needs of the residents that's within that 15-minute walk, bike, or hopefully eventually a transit trip. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And before we go to second round, I do support your recommendation and agree with all of this. I mean, it is a conundrum that we have to face. You know, one of our most treasured assets is our public open spaces and trails and parks. It's why many of us fell in love with Broomfield in the first place and decided to make it our home, me included. So I think community values are important. And as we saw during the pandemic, having that access was life-saving for so many people. And we want to ensure that that continues. At least I do. But thank you so much for your work on updating this. I think it's great. And we'll go to Councilmember. Oh, Councilmember Shaft didn't go first yet. I'm sorry, Councilmember, I didn't see you.
Thank you. So I do appreciate all the work that you and your team has done on this. And I know it's a team effort even outside of your department. So thank you for all the work on this. You know, I think Councilmember Anderson had mentioned, you know, it's not just about quantity, but it's also about quality. And I would also add to that, it's about location as well, right? And the mayor just mentioned, or I think it was Councilmember Ward that mentioned kind of that 15-minute or so, you know, quarter mile or half mile, I think, from every residence kind of idea of having some type of access like that. And so I think that location is a big part of that, and ensuring that, you know, that people do have access to parks and open space. You know, one of the things that I'm wrestling with is the single family projects PLD is being reduced. And I'm curious, it's not on the standard single family development, but it's the small single family project. And I'm curious kind of the basis for reducing that PLD for those.
You know, I'll do my best to try to answer this, but I think some of it was the desire to encourage the compact development when we have limited land remaining in the community. And then really looking at how some of this development can occur in a positive way, looking at some of our projects in Baseline and other areas that we might be able to make this work and have it be quite nice. So those are some of the reasons that we were, you know, looking at this reduction. And then I think just simply looking at projects that came through the development review process and what was the reality with the percentage public land dedication that was provided. Because there is a robust discussion with the staff on public land dedication, with the park staff, planning staff, economic vitality, our staff. Many are involved, and then it comes to you all. And so after that rigorous process, these were the percentages that we were generally getting to, not in every case, but in many cases.
Okay.
So we looked at that data and really felt that we needed to face that music and look at it and be realistic.
I'm glad you brought that up. So looking at that data, and you had mentioned kind of those last 5 years of data. And I would say that,
Absolutely.
you know, for me, I've been on council those 5 years. And I would say there was a lot of kind of trade-offs that we did with those developments, right? In order to get more affordable housing, we traded off the PLD. So I'm wondering, by reducing this ahead of time in an ordinance update, are we giving up some of that leverage to get that affordable housing in the future?
That's a good question. I personally think there will continue to be negotiations for many of the important community goals that we have that we want these projects to reflect. Manager Hoffman, did you?
Yes.
add?
Yes, what Fritz
Thank you.
just said. Councilmember Schaaf, so much, I mean, anytime we project, we're always wrong. So the structure has to be flexible and mobile enough that when you are on the receiving end of the unintended consequences, that you're able to shift. So again, from a development perspective, we know many things. One, it's becoming untenable to develop. Although we want to manage development, and particularly in affordable housing is expensive. It's expensive to build, it's expensive to maintain, it's expensive to keep the folks in there. And it's from a cost perspective and a development perspective, we rely on continuing to have development so that we don't have to greatly shift our revenue anticipation, which we're already having to do because we can see the slowing on development. So that's that unintended consequence. So when we move forward on these PLDs, I think what, and the mayor always puts it best, which is we've been in a state of cleanup for the last 3 years on things that should have been addressed. But for a whole host of reasons, they weren't, and it seems overwhelming at times. This is another one of those cleanups. It doesn't mean that we can't modify or alter based on extenuating circumstances as we move forward. So it's incumbent upon staff to have systems in place that can be modified and adapted based on if in fact we're seeing it's precluding affordable housing from moving forward.
And then one of the desires that I continue to hear is looking for more townhomes, especially for sale townhomes and condos. Are those going to be in that multifamily category? Or those in the single family category?
In this recommendation, again, which is very preliminary right now, we put the small single family 3,500 square lot and under, and townhomes kind of in that same bracket.
So the townhomes would go in that
Yes.
single family. Okay. All right. I appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Did I get everybody on first round? And let's go to second round, starting with Councilmember Lim.
I forgot to say that I agree with the recommendations. I did listen to a few of my fellow council members who expressed concern about reducing market rate multifamily property development. Just to complicate matters. I would want to caveat that with, well, if it's transit-oriented development, that helps us reach our sustainability goals. So if we want to try to balance all of these priorities, well, then somehow I guess I'd want to say, if you can put market rate multifamily housing where the rare spots where we have transit, then maybe that should be incentivized in some way with the public land dedication. I don't know exactly how you'd put that into a formula, but it would be a consideration in my mind that would be worth thinking about. In all of this conversation, we referred to 213, which will probably come back in some form. And I just wanted to recognize, we don't like the preemptive nature of we didn't like the preemptive nature of 213, but this is what we've said when we testified for 213. We are trying in different ways. We are adapting to try to get denser properties and try to put it near transit. So we're doing our own local efforts. And that was our objection to 213 was nobody recognized that. And we don't want people to tell us how to do it. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, well, did you get enough direction, Ms.
Yes, thank you
Fritz?
very much. Very
Mr.
helpful.
Strack, whole team? All right. Well, then I'm sure you'll be sticking around for the next one too.
I
So
sure will.
our final item this evening is a study session and request for direction related to zoning code updates. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Anna Burtonzetti's making her way down. I was surprised to see her because she's on vacation.
Oh, thank you.
Miss Anna.
They're dedicated.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. It was a last minute day off, so I am very happy to be here. This is actually a really exciting thing. And Shelby, Miss Jablon is going to do most of the presentation this evening. But in January, when we first started talking about the multi-year effort that we were kicking off to update plans and the zoning districts and the building codes, one of the things that we wanted to focus on was making sure that the municipal code requirements were consistent with the Broomfield Comprehensive Plan and our current policies. The proposed code updates that are being presented this evening are intended to provide the opportunity for more appropriately zoned city-owned property in a manner that will encourage and allow for community use, necessary municipal facilities, as well as protection of our wildlands. By updating zoning, the allowed uses become more clear to our community. And rather than utilizing planned unit development districts, the zoning district map will become very clear for the community. Instead of saying PUD, which is very abstract, it'll say things like open space or parks and recreation or municipal facilities, which we're calling the public facilities. It will also create a more straightforward process for consideration of our capital improvements for these properties. Capital projects team within community development will still do engagement early in the process as well as throughout the development of the plans, similar to what is currently in process for the Markle open space. However, these processes, if we were to go through a zoning such as will be outlined by Ms. Jablon, will not be duplicated through a site plan process for the properties that Broomfield owns that are also zoned PUD or planned unit development. There's often a duplication in process for capital projects where capital project staff starts a process. They do community engagement. They bring forward budget requests and contracts. And then we also do additional engagement, again, through a site plan process, which can be confusing to residents because they feel like they've already shared their comments. Things may be changing. They want to know why it's continuing to evolve. Why there maybe have been a contract already awarded for a different part of the engagement. So it can be very confusing for residents, and it's also duplicative for staff's resources as well. We would still have neighborhood meetings. We'd still have outreach to the community through open houses, opportunities for engagement. It just wouldn't be through a specific site plan process. So now I'll ask that Ms. Jablon, our senior planner with our department, to walk through the districts this evening, and we look forward to your questions.
Yeah, I've got some more for you guys. If we could go to the next page, please, and then the next page, please. And then one more. Oh, this one. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and City Council, and thank you, Anna, for the introduction. As Anna mentioned, planning staff is currently undergoing an effort to update our zoning code. Currently, the municipal code only really has one zoning district specifically intended for use for city-owned properties, which would be the Open Lands and Public Facilities District. We are currently proposing renaming and clarifying uses within this district, which will now be called public facilities. We are also proposing the addition of two new zone districts, the Open Space District and the Parks, Recreation, and Open Lands District. These districts will better clarify what uses are permitted within the city-owned land and protect parcels zoned as open space from development. These uses within these proposed districts are consistent with the Osborne Master Plan. Next page, please. As previously mentioned, the Open Lands and Public Facilities District, we are proposing to rename to just Public Facilities and will be used for properties the city may envision a municipal building on, library, wastewater facility, or a similar structure. The list of permitted uses shown on the screen also includes open space uses and open lands and public facilities uses. So you may anticipate a parcel that has a library and also a community garden or also a park area. We have made updates to the lot standards as well to establish no minimum lot size and update the building height to a maximum of 50 feet, which is consistent with buildings such as Paul Dirda, the library, and HHS. A new setback has been established from residential uses, which will be 30 feet plus an additional 1 foot for every 2 feet of building height. So this would be about 55 feet for a 50-foot tall building. And this setback has been used across all 3 zone districts in this presentation. Next page, please. This page outlines the permitted uses within the open space district. So this district is intended for passive recreational uses, including trails, crop cultivation, fishing, and other similar uses. The only structures that can really be anticipated within open space zone parcels will be covered seating areas, restrooms, pump stations, and management stations associated with reservoirs, and culturally significant or historical structures. Grazing of livestock has been added as a use by special review based on conversations with OSTAC. And similar to the public facilities district, no minimum lot area will be utilized, and the setback will be 30 feet plus 1 foot of additional 1 foot for each 2 feet of building height from residential. Currently, we're proposing a maximum height of 20 feet for structures in this zone district. However, staff is still having some internal discussions on this as related to pump stations and historic structures. Staff is working on a clear definition of reservoirs as well as requested by OSTAC. Next page, please. The second new zone district that is proposed will be parks, recreation, and open lands, which is intended for both active and passive recreation. This district permits open space uses as well as uses such as community gardens, rec centers, golf courses, and other similar uses. Wireless towers and amphitheaters have been listed as uses by special review, and the lot area and setback remains consistent with the other districts. The maximum height here will be 50 feet. Next page, please. The map on the screen shows the 12 properties within the city and county of Broomfield that are currently zoned open lands and public facilities. The city also owns a number of parcels with various zone districts such as PUD, agricultural, and light industrial. And we'll talk about that a bit on the next page here. So here we have included some example images of parcels that may fall into these proposed zone districts. So we have the water treatment facility, which could potentially be a public facilities parcel, the Walkie open space, which could be an open space parcel, and the Paul Dirda Rec Center, which would potentially be a parks, recreation, and open lands parcel. Should this ordinance move forward, staff's intention is to rezone city-owned properties as needed to ensure parcels fall into the most appropriate zone district. Additional engagement would be completed as part of each rezoning process for various properties, including a neighborhood meeting and public hearings. In the future, if Broomfield were to pursue improvements on one of these properties, community outreach would occur through the typical process utilized for capital improvement projects. Public engagement for CIP projects includes mailers, neighborhood meetings, surveys, pop-up information tents at public events, advisory committee meetings, and open houses. The type of engagement for each CIP project varies depending on the scale, and city council meetings will also be held to review budgets and contracts. If rezoned from planned unit development to one of these new zone districts, a separate PUD plan and site development plan would not be required. And the uses and development standards would just have to meet the zone districts. Thank you. That concludes the staff report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jablon. We will now go to council member questions or comments. You want to go first? Councilmember Lim wins. You were faster than Anderson.
Okay.
Then you.
Okay. Could you explain why the freestanding solar arrays are only allowed as use by special review on the public facilities.
Yeah, I think the concern with that use is the potential of taking an entire open space parcel and essentially making it unusable for passive recreation, turning it into a solar farm or something similar like that.
What about on open lands?
I think that is kind of the same concern there. So for a parcel that might be envisioned as a park, potentially using that as a solar farm instead is where that concern is coming from.
Okay, is it listed as a use by special review on the open lands?
Let me take a look 1 second. No, so it is only listed as use by special review within the public facilities district. But we can make changes to that if council would like.
I would like to have it at least as a use by special review on the open lands.
Okay.
I'm thinking there's, you identified the parcel that's right behind the service maintenance facility. That's, has a lot of land that goes north. I mean, there's certainly the Broomfield Trail goes through there. That whole parcel was identified as open land, and I was confused then too. Is the part where the Broomfield Trail goes through, is that open space or is that open land?
So the parcel, are you talking about the wastewater facility?
I'm talking about from the service facility on 144 up north to Silverleaf.
So that's currently one parcel. But since it is city-owned land, there is a potential for kind of a split zoning situation. So a portion of that parcel could be zoned open space and a portion of that parcel could be zoned public facilities. Currently, the area that has the facility on it would need to be zoned public facilities at least. And that zoning is the one that does allow solar as a use by special review.
Okay, I was thinking you were going to, when you pointed to that parcel on the map as maybe being broken up, I thought it would be broken up into open lands to right north of the facility, and then open space, up further towards the trail.
Yeah, so it is a potential. I don't think we've determined exactly how we see specific parcels being rezoned at this time. But currently, the way we have the ordinance drafted, the public facilities district would be the only one that allows freestanding solar arrays as a use by special review.
I guess not knowing how we're going to rezone these parcels, I guess I'd want to consider that on open lands, we could at least consider the freestanding solar arrays.
Councilmember, if I could add, I just wanted to add in a little bit. We do, as we were drafting these and crafting specifically the open space district, we were keeping in mind that the open space district, just so it's for the community's benefit, would primarily be used for open space properties, those protected by the charter. So properties that were dedicated specifically for open space, or properties that were purchased with open space funds. Just the community's aware it wouldn't necessarily be utilized just because there might be a trail corridor or currently be in a natural state, but it would be specifically for those parcels. But one of the ways that staff worked on these zoning districts was a little bit of an umbrella, like actually Ms. Pritz was talking about with the term open lands. So the public facilities district is designed to be a very large umbrella. It covers buildings, it covers parks, it could also cover open space. And that's where the solar arrays could be allowed. Solar arrays, the freestanding large fields, I think was our concern, where they would significantly impact and not make a natural area usable for wildlife or for passive recreation. It would have a significant impact. So we felt that that was more closely aligned with areas where we had other public facilities or were not having active recreation in the area. So it was better aligned with the public facilities district. But as was mentioned by Ms. Giblon, we could look at adding it as a use by special review for parks and recreation, if so directed by city council.
Okay, that would be my preference, is to have that looked at further as a use by special review. I mean, we have, there's use by special review for communications towers, I think, in there and everything else. So, I mean, that's kind of disruptive in my mind too. And then we also have the disaster on Nordstrom open space that's never going to look right anymore.
Councilmember Lim, if I could just jump in, just when we're talking about wireless towers, they are a little different than solar arrays because of some of the issues with the FCC and the mandated siting. And there's a current federal bill going through to even expand that preemption more. So I just wanted to throw that out there because a lot of times solar arrays could be a use by special review and a tower would be a use by right.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's, those are my comments for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And I appreciate Councilmember Lim's question about the solar panels, and I think that would be wise of us to look into that potential. So my main question here is how this relates to the Broomfield Charter, and kind of, sorry, Mayor, to you might want to brought this up yourself, but the 2020 ballot question 2C, which is a big deal in Broomfield, where we amended the charter to remove mineral extraction as an exempted change in use for public open space. I'm assuming that is like wiped clean so that no matter what the change of use, it's still not there. But then when I was looking back at that section, there's a lot of references to open space. So just want to make sure we're not doing something that's impacting that's maybe a question for our attorney, but that we're not doing that. That's going to impact our charter, because it seems like a little gray fuzzy area there in chapter 18.
Councilmember, I'm happy to answer that. So with this proposal that we were discussing tonight, there was no change proposed to the charter. All of the charter protections, the change in use protections, all of that language remains unchanged. We did try to keep in mind the charter as we were crafting the open space district, making sure that the uses that we were providing in the open space district aligned with the charter, but there's no change to the charter protections. All of that remains in place moving forward, regardless of the zoning of the property, because it's tied to how the property was acquired, whether it was purchased with open space funds, it's dedicated, it's designated as open space. In regards to open space, I know this came up when we were at the OSTAC meeting as well, because at the time we weren't certain if we had to allow oil and gas development within the districts, and we have had that confirmed. And as reflected in tonight's presentation, oil and gas development is not proposed either as a permitted use or a use by special review in any of these districts.
Okay, thank you I'm glad you've done that research, and that is my main area of concern. So that's all I have for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the presentation and I like everything that's presented here. I do want to second, or I guess third, Councilmember Lim's comments on solar by special review. I actually saw really interesting news reporting recently of grazing that can be done on solar farms and the benefit that for both the grazing animals as well as the solar farm companies, because it reduces the amount of maintenance they have to do, so that they can use it for grazing. Goats and cows can graze on the land. I also saw at the same time I was looking at a study that showed solar farms actually have a greater biodiversity of plant life, animal life, I mean, because I don't know, I'm not an expert in the field, but that's what I read. So I do want to go along with Councilmember Lim and encourage that we do look at solar farms too. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Next is Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one question out of curiosity. So you cited the reason for this change as a way to potentially protect open land spaces by zoning. Is this totally proactive, or is this some issue where we're starting to see the beginnings of maybe this will be a problem? What are we seeing? Where did that comment come from?
I think the intention is for us to use these zone districts for properties that we know, I'm speaking about specifically the open space district, that we know we are not going to build on. So we will rezone that so the uses are very clearly outlined for the residents. They'll understand what can or cannot go on the parcel. And developers will see that too. Oh, this is an open space parcel. We're not going to contact the city and try and make a purchase on this or anything like that. So it'll just really outline what exactly is permitted there and kind of line that zoning up with what's intended for the property.
Okay, thank you. Otherwise, this looks good to me. I mean, it seems like we're just being a lot more explicit about things that we've already made very clear, but now it's actually codified. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you. My question was asked for the most part, but I would just say I think this is a great idea, specifically to provide homeowners, landowners more specificity as what could be built. You know, there's a big difference between a water reservoir and a wastewater plant, and this specifies where one can and cannot be built with more certainty for landowners. So thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I just wanted to echo the comments that Councilmember Lim raised. And other than that, just say, I think everything else you guys have presented this on this item they look good to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member questions or comments? You good? I'm good. This is great. Thanks for clarifying that, because I think there is a lot of new folks too, and who haven't been around that don't understand the difference and the distinction. So thank you all for updating this as well.
Thank you.
All right, and thanks to the staff for tonight's discussion. That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. There being no further business, the study session is adjourned. Thank you.